by Councillor Charlotte. All in favor? Motion's carried. Adoption of the minutes of the regular council meeting of November 10th. Someone want to move that, please? Councillor Juncker, seconded by Councillor Brooks Hill. All in favor? Motion's carried. And the special council minutes of November 12th, 2020. Someone move that. Councillor Charlotte, second by Councillor Juncker. All in favor? Motion's carried. Any business arising from the minutes of the regular council meeting of November 10th? Seeing none, moving on. Any business arising from the special council minutes of November 12th? Seeing none, we're moving on to item 5A. Public hearing, development services, we have a variance permit. Mr. Simon, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. So the first item that Development Services has for council consideration today is a development variance permit. This is an application to vary the side yard setback requirements for a proposed addition. So the subject lands are located at 304 9th Street East. They are zoned single-family and two-family residential district. Property falls within the multi-family development permit area. It's fully serviced by municipal water and sanitary, and is surrounded by residential development. So as part of any development variance permit for the application, we do send letters to all neighboring property owners within 100 meters of the subject lands. There were notices that were sent to 36 property owners for this particular application. There were no letters in support or opposition of the variance received. So the proposal itself is to allow for the development of a covered walkway that will provide protected access to the proposed secondary suite. In order to accomplish this, they will be required to reduce the minimum side yard setback from 1.5 meters to 0.63 meters. Given the fact that we do have a variance proposed for this site, it is the practice of staff to recognize all the historical siting on the subject lands to bring the whole property into compliance with one single application. So as part of this, we're also going to be looking at including a variance for the existing carport structure, which is currently encroaching into the front yard setback area, as well as a variance for an existing accessory building, which is encroaching into the rear yard setback area. So with getting into specifics about the side yard setback, as shown on the site plan that's submitted by the applicant and included in the agenda package, the covered walkway's roof line is proposed to be 0.63 meters from the property line. The covered walkway itself, the support posts are about 0.78 meters from the side yard setback, or from the property line rather, but we will recommend granting it all the way up to the roof line to ensure that, again, at future building permit stage, there's no ambiguity with respect to what the intent of the variance is. So you can see that at the side here, and this covered walkway will provide access to a future secondary suite and will provide coverage from snow and from other inclement weather. The carport structure itself is required to meet a 6 meter front yard setback requirement. It's located 5.87 meters from the property line, so we are seeking to bring that in compliance with this application. And then the accessory building at the rear is required to meet a 1.2 meter setback requirement, and it's currently at 0.76 meters. And again, this is existing, and we are looking to recognize it and bring it into compliance at this time. So when staff have evaluated the proposal, this is part of overall renovations to the property, and staff are supportive of the variances for the following reasons. Covered walkway will provide protection for the future occupants of the secondary suite for protection from the weather. It will also, given it's going to be a flat roof design, it will help with snow management as well. It will provide that added amenity for the secondary suite, and secondary suites are supported through the policies of the official community plan. The proposal does comply with all other zoning requirements, and the other variances that are requested as part of this application are to correct historical siting issues for that carport structure and the existing accessory building, and they do not have an operational impact. This has been reviewed by Public Works and Engineering, and there should not be any issues with the existing siting of these structures. So on the board for council is the recommended staff resolution, which again would be to grant all variances associated with this application. Thank you. This concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. Councillors, can we get a motion put on the table and then we can discuss this? Councilor Shaw.
The development variance permit VVP 2020-02 be approved at 309 9th Street East as seen on the screen. 304 9th Street East, thank you.
Thank you. Second for the motion, please, Councilor Lyons. Any questions for Mr. Simon? Councilor Junker.
Yeah, I have no issues with it at all. I just had one quick question about the parking. Does our parking bylaw currently allow then, like, for tandem parking? Or is it kind of a decide per property kind of thing, or?
Through your worship, tandem parking is permitted on residential properties. Staff do work with the applicant to make sure that the assignment of the stalls is functional, i.e. you can't box in the stall that's dedicated for the secondary suite. That one has to have uninhibited access to a public roadway.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
That's it. Councilor Sherwood.
I'm curious about the historical buildings that are within, or not within the variances that were permitted by that zoning. Sorry, I'm having a hard time talking today. Is this from before changes to the zoning, or was just misplaced citing, or how does this happen? Because we see it quite regularly. I have no issue with it. I'm just curious as to the history of why.
Through your worship, so as far as staff are aware, based on records, which once you start predating the current bylaw of 1984, it does become a little bit spotty to determine exactly when these buildings were constructed. But we are aware that the house was constructed sometime, I believe, around 1960, which one can anticipate that the carport was constructed at that time. And the determination of non-conforming siting is requires quite an extensive analysis to actually delve into that history, which was not available for this property. It's common that staff do see this, so whenever there is a variance, you will see all these other historical siting issues be brought into compliance at that time, just to negate any future challenges that it might pose from a zoning bylaw conformance perspective.
Wonderful. And then just to follow up with that, Your Worship, I'm just curious as to what are the odds or what are the chances of this happening in modern building? Is this something where, like, every once in a while we see a residential house that has to be brought into conformance because it's slightly out? Historical buildings makes perfect sense. Like, I get it. I'm just curious as to what we have in place to make sure that when people are given a permit and they get a citing, and these are our bylaws, and how accurate and easy is that to comply with?
Through your worship, so there are tools that the Development Services Department does have. So for instance, upon new construction for a single-family dwelling or any other building for that matter, at foundation stage, they're going to get a building location certificate. Surveyor goes out to the property, does all the measurements, makes sure that they provide a plan to us that shows the exact location of that structure, and then we do a double check to make sure that it complies with all setback requirements, and if it doesn't, we ask, has a variance been granted, and if a variance hasn't been granted, then we make sure that they go through the proper process to get that variance granted.
All right, great. Thank you.
Any other questions, Councilor Lyons?
So we, at the last council meeting, we addressed 10 centimeter variance on a new building location.
Right.
So it does continue to happen, it's just an odd mistake we had occurred.
Yeah.
Any further questions, concerns? One test, we're going to do this, all these variances all at one time, correct? Okay. Any further questions before I call the question? All those in favor? Motion's carried, thank you. Moving on to announcements from the mayor, I just want to just kind of reiterate some of the stuff about COVID-19. There's a statement that came out today from the government, and I'll just read a portion of it. Our commitment to supporting each other and coming together as a community is now more important than ever to curb the spread of COVID-19 in our entire province. The choices we make now and in the coming weeks and months will be essential to getting and keeping our province on the right track and addressing the pressures of our healthcare system and our communities. We now need to step up our efforts to keep essential services open. So as Councillor Junker was giving us news from what he heard about an hour and a half ago, the provincial government has ordered some other facilities closed, yoga studios, a movie theater, a few things like that. So we're seeing some changes that may implicate changes here in our community that will need to be brought forward as well, but the provincial health officer is in control of those things. So I just want to reiterate to the entire community, masks are mandatory when you're out in a public space, and here in this space you'll see that councillors have their masks. Some of them have their masks off so that we can speak, so you can hear us. If we get up and move around, we will be putting our masks on. So I just want you to be aware of that. And if you're out and about in the community in any public setting, whether it's a store or business, or going into any city buildings, masks are mandatory. So we hope that we're all going to be safe and do the best that we can to make ourselves safe, and in essence, making the community safe. So thank you. So we now have a video presentation from Revelstoke Mountain Resort. I'm going to put Mr. Brownlie on the phone as we get the presentation ready, and he'll be ready to answer any of your questions should you have them. So just bear with me here as I go on. Cindy, am I down? David, scary. It took me about 4 times to get through to you because I forgot to dial 9. Anyway, we're just about to do your presentation, but I'd like you to stay in the line in case councillors have questions.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Thanks, Cindy.
Hello, my name is Steve Brownlie, President of the Revelstoke Mountain Resort in Northland Province. Thank you for the opportunity to present the detailed work that we have completed with respect to the base area lands of Revelstoke Mountain Resort. After submitting our master plan update to the province in April 2019, we engaged Ecosine Mountain Planners, a Canadian company that is recognized as one of the top resort planners in the world, to work with us on a detailed concept that we can execute with confidence. Although we identified all future development nodes for the resort, we focused on those areas that we believe we can bring forward in the next 10 to 20 years, depending on market dynamics. A key amenity for our future was recently announced with the Cabot Pacific Golf Course and bringing the Cabot brand to Revelstoke. The neighborhood plan outlines the higher density neighborhoods with overnight accommodation and commercial areas in red, such as the village core and south phase. This area also includes a significant portion of our employee housing. The spot site just off Camosi Road is not high density, but does have commercial activities. The residential neighborhoods in purple include Hillside Residential, Mackenzie Landing and Modesty Estates, the Golf Course Residential, and our Learning Facility Residential. The land use plan sets out more definitive site plans and development types across the resort. This plan provides for approximately 2,600 units for townhomes, condo hotels, townhomes, and single-family residences, and uses just over 8,000 bed units. This is 57% of the total bed units available for development at the resort build-out. In the plan, we will provide 10% of bed units for employee housing, with the majority being on the resort. Amenities planned over and above the mountain and the golf course include green space, interconnected trail network, tennis courts, a destination spa, and a village water facility. The village is anchored by the Revelation Brownlie and Sutton Place. The Hammond Hotel currently under construction is across Community Road from Sutton Place. The village plan includes a pedestrian-only village with underground parking and commercial spaces such as restaurants and retail shops on the bottom floor of the building, with hotel and condo hotel style units above. Buildings B, C, E, D, A2, and A3 are planned for condo hotel residence buildings. Buildings A1 and F are planned as traditional hotels. There is a small townhome site below Mackenzie Landing and a parcel of land set aside for a fire hall across from Building D. The ski hill and Revelation Gondola will anchor one side of the village, and the Tower Pacific Golf Course will anchor the other side of the village. As we develop the village core, we will replace the parking from the current parking area to the south base. We will start with gravel lots that we currently have, and eventually we will build a parking structure to accommodate the base of your traffic. At completion, the south base will include a new lift access system, 3 lifts that will take you from the bottom to the top of Mount Mackenzie above the current Stoke chair, a new BYLAWS skier services, a condo hotel, Building H, access to the hillside residential townhomes and a boutique-style hotel. And most importantly, our 3 employee housing buildings with apartment style 1 and 2 bedroom units that will provide housing for approximately 450 to 600 employees when all 3 buildings are completed. This slide highlights the transition as we replace the parking from the village development with gravel parking lots at the south base, build employee housing, and provide access to the hillside residential lands. Employee housing is a priority for Revelstoke Mountain Resort. The Parks and Trails Plan highlights the green space at the resort, the parkland dedication around Williamson Lake, and the interconnected trail network that follows the Community Trail Master Plan to connect the resort and Williamson Lake with the town. We have 2 3D models of the resort. The first model shows the village and south base development looking from the north to the south. It is a compact village with building heights ranging from 3 to 8 stories, which is consistent with the original master plans and zoning. The second model provides a view looking back at the village from the south to the north. We're trying to maximize views and sun exposure while achieving the density required to support a vibrant and successful village. The hillside residential neighborhood is accessed from the south base and will be a neighborhood comprising of 8 sites, 7 ski-in and ski-out townhome sites, and 1 boutique hotel site. The golf course residential neighborhood is at the north end of the golf course above golf holes 10, 11, 12, and 13. The development will be a mix of single-family and townhome sites. We could not find an appropriate amount of land for a golf learning center adjacent to the resort. As a result, we have located the learning center on owned lands just off Airport Road. The flat portion of the land will be developed into a golf learning center, and the land on the bluff above is planned for townhomes in the future. We are continuing to work on alternative access solutions for this site. Lastly, we wanted to share our development priorities for Revelstoke Mountain Resort over the next few years. The Hammond Hotel, which is currently under construction, and of course the Cabot Golf Course, Phase 1 permit for clearing and grubbing has been approved by Council, and we expect to have our requirements completed shortly. The favorable for construction of the golf course is being finalized for submission. Employee housing is an important project for both us and the community. Our application for development is ready to submit. the plans to move forward on our first building. Both the Cali Hotel and residences are adjacent to the golf course over in 1 and 18. We'd like to move forward on these projects in conjunction with the golf course. We have a small townhouse site access from Mountain Road between the golf course and Mackenzie Landing that we would also like to bring to market. Finally, significant infrastructure investment will be required to ensure these projects can proceed. Reservoir, roads and intersections, trails, and the South Bay State lots are examples. The plan outline is just over 57% of the total developable opportunity when the resort is fully built out. This portion of the plan is expected to take from 10 to 20 years to complete, depending on the market conditions. Thank you for your time today to give us the opportunity to share the detailed Revelstoke Mountain Base Area plan with you. And we look forward to your feedback and working with you and the community to bring this plan to life. Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation electronically, Dave. Appreciate that, and the ability for the community to see kind of the intimate plans of the building and build out over the years. So I appreciate that. Councillors, do you have any questions or comments? Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, I was wondering if they have a date for when they expect staff accommodation building 1 to be completed.
Did you hear that, Dave?
Yeah, I did. The first week, we actually, I believe it was just last week, we actually submitted the application. So as we move through that process, once we move through that process, then we'll have a better idea on the start date. And I think from the start date to completion date, it should probably be less than 30 months. That 30 months would kind of be at the outset. So once we kind of get approval and get started, that would be the time frame.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, Councillor Ryan?
Yeah, what percentage of staff do you think that the building 1 will house? I don't know the numbers of staff that you have, but roughly.
Well, it's going to house approximately, again, depending on the final configuration, but probably about 180 staff members, and that's actually going to be, probably close to 30%.
Okay, thanks.
Councillors, any other questions? Councillor Juncker.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I was just curious about the definition of what a condo hotel is. Is that the same thing then as like the Sutton, where people can own, like part of the building is hotel rooms and then part of it is owned by private people, like residents?
Sure. Do you have a definition of a condo hotel, David?
Yeah, that's correct. So that's a strata titled unit that people can individually buy, but then when they're not using the unit, they can put in a rental pool, similar to the Sutton place.
Okay. That answers your question, Councillor?
Yeah, thanks.
Councillors, any other questions? Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, we were told that the Heli Hotel construction was going to be concurrent with the staff accommodation, and I'm just wondering if that's still the plan and if the Heli Hotel has a similar timeline for completion.
Yeah, the Heli Hotel is about the same for completion, although just given the start with the foundation this year, and there's not going to be anything really done through the winter, so that will actually be a little bit longer. Again, the goal was to get the Heli Hotel started and get the vertical construction going, and then move the crews from the Heli Hotel onto the employee housing.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, Councillor Charlotte, you're taking off your mask. Do you have a question?
No, just impressed with the presentation. Looks like it's coming along nicely. There's some good pieces in there, and hopefully we can pull through and have some solid market conditions to see this come to fruition.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Councillor Elliott.
Just moving from phase 1 of the golf course and then clearing to phase 2, time on that, do you have an estimate?
Yeah, well, our goal is we're right at the 1 yard line to get that, to get our variance grouting permit and make that happen through the winter. Actually, when the ground was frozen, it's actually better better and more disturbance, or less disturbance on the land, so that's good. And then we actually want to be under construction as soon as we can in the springtime. That's our goal. So the golf course will take 2 full summers of construction and grow it. And if we get a full 2 summers, then we should be playing on the golf course in the summer of 23.
And David, who oversees that? Is that an application to the Resort Development Branch, or is that the municipality?
Sorry, Rob, I didn't quite hear that.
Just who do you apply, who's the application go into? The Resort Development Branch, the province, or is it a municipal area?
For the golf course?
Yes.
Yeah, the golf course is through the city, through the city office. To get the clearing and grubbing permit, we did have to get approval provincially and federally, which we are done. And then our phase 2 permit is actually within the city.
Okay.
Okay, answers. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, so I know there's a lot of big things at play, and it makes it difficult to, I mean, we don't have the right to request the certain timelines from you guys in terms of what you develop at what stage, but obviously our priority is employee housing, and I think one thing that some residents might see is that the golf course is moving forward, which is great, and that's very exciting news, but I think the worry is that that might be completed before the employee housing is finished, and I'm just wondering if you think that will be the case.
Well, again, depending on when we can start the employee housing, ideally, when the golf course is open for play, in an ideal world, we'd be finishing the employee housing so it's ready for that winter. But until we get closer to understanding when we will get approval, I'm not quite sure what that looks like, but that would be an ideal scenario.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks. And I'll ask one last time, councillors, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Brownlie. I appreciate you taking the time to give us a presentation and actually be on the line with us to answer your questions. As you can see from this council's perspective and from the community's perspective, seeing the employee housing move forward in a fashion that's fairly quick is something that we like to see. So we appreciate your honesty as to how things are moving forward, and we look forward to the application getting started. So thanks again for your time.
Yeah, thank you for your time. Much appreciated.
All right, thanks again.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, councillors, thank you. Now we're going to move on to item 9A, bylaw. Mr. Simon, do you have a presentation?
Thank you, Your Worship. So we have a zoning bylaw text amendment for council consideration today. It's an amendment to the CD5 zone. This will ultimately allow for the use of cannabis retail sales within that zone. So the subject property itself is located at 314 First Street West, Zone Comprehensive Development Zone 5, also within the Downtown Revitalization and Development Permit area. And the property is surrounded by commercial development in the C1 zone, which is our main downtown commercial zone. So as part of this application, it does have to undergo a provincial review. The Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch, otherwise known as the LCRB, has completed the eligibility and suitability requirements of the Cannabis Control and Licensing Act. The application has now been referred to the city to ultimately make a recommendation back to the province about whether or not this will be supported. So giving council a very brief background on some of the engagement that was undertaken in the process to ultimately craft the cannabis regulations for the city. There was extensive engagement prior to legalization of cannabis retail sales, which occurred in October 2018. Engagement included a survey on the new regulations, direct stakeholder engagement with the Social Development Committee, the Health Advisory Committee, Advisory Planning Commission, as well as the RCMP. The information that was provided through both the public web page and the Chamber of Commerce. Then all of the information that was collected, as well as looking at best practices from throughout the province and throughout the city, or the country rather, was collected and embedded through regulations that are now in the zoning bylaw as well as council policy. So this application was considered by council initially on November 10th of this year. So bylaw 2279, there was a resolution to deny it that was brought forward. This was ultimately defeated, and council passed the following resolution: that zoning bylaw number 2279 report be brought back for consideration at the next regular council meeting. So here we are today, where council will be considering first and second reading of the bylaw. So to get into some details of the proposal, for those of you that were not here at the November 10th meeting, the CD5 zone does not currently permit cannabis retail sales, and the zone is intended to allow for the development of a liquor store and pub. So the development proposal entails renovation of the existing space to allow a separate cannabis store with its own entrance. So you can see the cannabis store would be right between the bar and grill and the liquor store. And you can see from the proposed layout here, it would have its own fully separate entrance, and it would be separated from both the pub as well as the liquor store. So when staff are evaluating this, we do look at some policies within the official community plan, mainly being section 3.3 of the OCP. This includes goals as they relate to economic development within the city. Some of the general policies from this section, they are overarching and quite broad. They include encouraging the establishment of small businesses through appropriate zoning and bylaws, pursuing economic opportunities that complement the existing use, character, and image of Revelstoke. In this case, it would be directly related to the image and character of downtown Revelstoke. And then it does look at facilitating local business efforts by providing sufficient opportunities for diverse facilities throughout the city. The subject lands themselves do contain an existing business that was established through the CD zone. I believe that was around 2005, if I'm remembering correctly. And the intent of the zone was to provide economic opportunity in the form of a pub and liquor sales. So moving into the zoning bylaw evaluation, section 519 of the zoning bylaw does include regulations as they pertain to cannabis retail sales, and these are the predominant policies that staff would use to evaluate any cannabis retail sales application. So these regulations include not permitting them within 100 meters of another cannabis retail sales establishment, not within 100 meters of a school, daycare facility, community center, youth center, public park, playground, or other municipally owned or operated facility that has programs which cater to youth. So the lands themselves are about 112 meters away from the nearest cannabis retail sales location, and they are about 365 meters away from the nearest child care facility. So this 365 number does come from looking at the provincial database as it relates to spatial distribution of child care facilities throughout the city. However, the lands themselves are located 18 meters from the Revelstoke Museum. The museum is a municipally owned building, and it does have programs which cater to youth. The museum has standard programming, which does include programs that are directly targeted to youth in July and August every year. If the zoning bylaw text amendment is approved by council, the applicant would require a subsequent development variance permit in conjunction with the standard cannabis application in order to ultimately allow the development. So the applicant has concurrently submitted that cannabis application, which is CAN 2019-05. The city's liquor and cannabis policy states that all cannabis applications for retail sales must not be accepted until the use is actually permitted within the zone. The location is not within the minimum distance of a site that caters to youth or another cannabis location, and a referral has been received by the province. So for this particular application, which is the one that the province is looking for direction from the city on, staff cannot consider it and not bring it forward to council for ultimate consideration until the first question of the use being permitted in the zone is ultimately dealt with by council. And then subsequently, we would also have to deal with potentially through a variance permit, should council support the use, for varying that minimum distance of a site that caters to youth. The only one out of the three that has really been checked is this referral from the province being received. So as part of the application review, internal and external agency referral comments are received. I will not read these comments verbatim for you. They were provided in the report, but we did want to flag the interior health comments that were provided as part of this referral. And there were some concerns with co-locating this in proximity to the existing alcohol outlet. And Interior Health did have some comments that should this ultimately be approved, they would request that the applicant and city do consider ways to mitigate the potential impacts, such as alternating or varying operating hours. So ultimately, the staff recommendation as presented in the original November 10th council report was to deny the bylaw. Staff do not have sufficient direction within the policy framework as it exists to ultimately be able to support the proposed rezoning, and would require further direction from council as to how to move forward with this. So that resolution that was put forth to deny these bylaw number 2279 was ultimately defeated. Therefore, the resolution for council consideration today is consideration of first and second reading. Thank you. This concludes the presentation.
Mr. Simon. Okay, council, so we can get this on the table and have a discussion on it. Someone want to put motion number 1 on, please? Councilor Charlotte.
Zoning amendment bylaw number 2279 be read a first and second time.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Elliott. Comments? I have a couple questions that I've asked last meeting, and I'll ask again today, Mr. Simon. So how many other cannabis stores do we have in the queue at this point?
Through your worship, we have 4 already established locations. This would be number 5, and we do have another application that is in the queue right now that would be dealing with a similar challenge here with respect to bylaw conformity. So that would bring us up to number 6. So to be clear, 4 that are approved and 2 that are pending, including this one.
Great, thank you for that. And bearing in mind, Interior Health's letter stating about liquor store being next door to cannabis, I had asked last meeting, is there other communities in the province that have that configuration?
Through your worship, there are several examples that we were able to find, one of them being in Salmon Arm, where they are actually located directly side by side. I believe Kelowna was the other one where they were located side by side as well, and there are multiple instances in Burnet and Kamloops where it would be kind of a large commercial plaza where both the liquor establishment as well as a cannabis retail sales outlet are both located within that plaza itself.
And so the concern from staff at dealing with our policy that we have in place right now is the fact that there are children that go to the museum during the summer months for programs that the museum puts on. Is that correct?
Your worship, that is correct. And the current policy framework that's embedded into the zoning bylaw does not give direction to staff as to the threshold of how many days out of the year ultimately constitutes a municipally owned building that has programs that cater to youth. It doesn't establish that criteria, so that is reflected in the staff recommendation here.
Okay. Councilors, any questions of Mr. Simon? Seeing none, I'm going to make the statement that I'm supportive of this moving forward because I feel that it is kind of around the corner from the museum and not directly across from it. I was on the council. I put in these recommendations about being away from childcare facilities and that sort of thing when we brought this in several years ago. But at this point, I don't believe that this is going to harm anyone or cause problems, so I'm supportive of that. But I'm just asking for other councils to either weigh in or we can ask the question. Councilor Charlotte and Councilor Juncker.
I was curious about what was the discussion around the original council table that was deciding on the rules for cannabis retail. That museums don't seem to be mentioned specifically in the regulations, but museums are a very common place for A, to be municipally owned, but also to have children's programming. So I was wondering if there was any discussion about museums, if they were left out of the definition on purpose, or if that was something that just wasn't considered risk at the time. I think that providing some clarity around that would probably be great for our business owners that are trying to develop, especially with a process like this that takes so much time and investment to go through.
I personally don't recall any discussion about museums. However, do you recall anything, Ms. Lowe, regarding museums per se when we were discussing where we would put in the limitations when we were talking about child minding areas?
So through your worship, I believe this discussion would have went more around youth programming.
Right.
So that's what's in the policy. So it wasn't exactly narrowed down to museums or galleries, but youth programming was definitely discussed.
So it's more what it was, not where it was.
Exactly.
Councillor Juncker, you had a question? Councillor Ellis?
More so just a general statement. It was interesting watching this and I'm looking at Ms. Lowe going, we need to bring it back to another meeting for this vote. So I appreciate it coming back. I voted to approve every single cannabis application that we've had so far, including the variance one that we did, which was completely different circumstances. My issue with this one is I'm supportive of staff's recommendation to vote it down, and it's or to deny it rather. And it's not so much for me the issue of the children at the museum, because I somewhat agree with you. I don't really think it's directly down the road. And I haven't seen people purchasing cannabis so far in the couple of years it's been legal and then standing outside and smoking it.
Right.
So I'm not too concerned there. My issue more so is that, as you said, your council just 2.5 years ago went through this whole thing. It was a really extensive community survey, it cost a lot of money, it was done really well. I think it was like the best one at that time. And I think, it was, staff at that time did a really good job and looked at all the zones and made it for what they thought based on feedback from the community. And I just think that to go and suddenly start changing text amendments based on different applications for zoning, when we've recently dealt with that bylaw, it's very relatively new compared to some of our other ones, which just, to me, doesn't make sense at this time. I can understand that, maybe the owner's trying to branch out, open another business, struggling maybe, but I just don't think it's appropriate to start changing the CDO5. I think that might potentially open us up to a rabbit hole where you might start seeing lots of applications possibly coming into development services looking for just a text amendment change to a zoning, and then before you know it, we're kind of right. So
Okay.
that's my thoughts. That's what I'm leaning towards right now.
Okay, Mr. Simon.
Your Worship, sorry, just to provide some clarification as well around the CD zone and around when this report was originally brought to council. There was specific mention of the CD zones in that report, and that report did mention that they would be considered on a case-by-case basis. And when the city is doing wholesale amendments to the zoning bylaw to consider different uses, generally speaking, because the CD zones are a snapshot in time of what makes sense for that site, they're typically left alone. So just wanted to provide that context to council that the previous report did specifically mention it, and it did say that exactly like we're doing today, it would be considered on a case-by-case basis.
Great, awesome. Okay, Councillor Elliott and Councillor Sherwood.
A couple things. The perception of a cannabis store versus a liquor store, in the legal context, they're on par. There's no distinction. Is that right?
That's correct.
There's a nightclub Traverse across the street and a pub and a liquor store around the corner. And now a cannabis store is part of his business plan for that complex there to make it viable. I know the traffic.
I don't know what the context is, so saying that statement and making it viable.
No, it just, he feels it's complementing his business plan. And that's my take. But the gist of it, if we're saying that a cannabis store is wrong, but a liquor store and a nightclub and a pub is okay, then I think we're going down the wrong path.
Okay, thank you for that.
Just kind of further to the CDO5 zone, the comprehensive development zones are specific to specific parcels. So this CD5 zone, is that only this block, or it wouldn't be found anywhere else, correct?
Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, that is correct. It is only applicable to this parcel of land.
Okay, so if we make this amendment, it is only for this block. It's not a blanket
That's correct.
tool for anyone else to use that we could then pursue on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about this coming into this meeting, but having heard the conversations around this, I think I am supportive. I think that the CD zone for this block was designed to create a space for a public house. And as Councillor Elliott mentions, it's not our place to judge what is correct and what is not. If they're seeing the same, then they're seeing the same. Being around the corner from the museum and it being seasonal time for children's programming and limited children's programming, I think that, like we said, it's a delicate line to be balanced. And if you go down that route, then you start looking at dance studios or somewhere where a children's class is used partly through the year, and it does make it really challenging to plan your business. So in that sense, and because it is just this one CD zone that seems to fit with the uses, I'm supportive at this time.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other councillors, comments? Councillor Mark?
Has anybody asked the museum what they think? Do they care?
What's your son?
Through your worship, we have not heard anything or specifically reached out to the museum. This is a developer-led application, and any prior engagement would be on the developer or the applicant to do so. With this, if it is considered the first and second time as part of the standard legislative public hearing process, staff would not only advertise but provide letters within 100 meters of the subject lands.
So that would go out, should this pass, then it would go out as part of the public hearing where letters would go to. Councillor.
So once the public hearing comes, if we get to that stage, if we agree that it's okay to go to that stage, then we'll get comments, well, 5 or 6 cannabis stores are maybe too much. Then we can make a judgment at that time. But at this point, we're just saying, can it get to that stage?
Yeah, you may hear comments from those who do the programming for kids in the area who will weigh in one way or the other, and that might help. So I'm going to go Councillor Ron and Councillor Miller.
Yeah, it just feels like if we do that, then we're going to hear from a bunch of people with comments that aren't really related to whether they like the location. I mean, in some cases, if it's people who have children's programming, for sure that's useful input, but I think you might also hear from other cannabis store retailers or owners or whatever, and it might get away from the actual issue, which is just that like we put these rules in place for a reason. So I think I'm kind of with Dr. Councillor Juncker on this, that if we start to make these rules, then we don't know what kind of door we're opening up for other zoning text amendments. So I don't think I'm in support of this.
That's your prerogative. So, Councillor Juncker.
Yeah, Your Worship, just to clarify, too, if a text amendment was passed to the zoning, does that it does trigger a public hearing then because you're changing the zoning then? Am I understanding correct? Or was that just because, well, I see that it's be scheduled in accordance, but I was misunderstanding when I was watching the last video trying to capture it, because I had heard the idea was floated like to have one as an option, or is it as it says because it's of the local government? Or the option was just discussed as a separate.
No, it's going to happen. If you pass this, it's going to happen. Mr. Simon, do you want to weigh in just a little more?
Your Worship, that is correct. The only way that you can waive a public hearing requirement is if it is consistent with your official community plan. And in this instance, staff's recommendation to council would be to hold a public hearing to ultimately consider this zoning bylaw text amendment. Any zoning bylaw text amendment has to go through this process in accordance with the Local Government Act for a public hearing.
Councilor Bergshill.
So, to clarify a little bit, so with the process, there would still be required a variance permit as well because of its proximity to the museum. This would just allow that use at that location, but then to actually get the license, there would have to be a variance, right?
Through your worship, to give council overall a picture of the process that this would ultimately have to go through, because it is multiple layers of applications. What we have before you today is a zoning bylaw text amendment. Should first and second reading be granted, this will go out for a public hearing. After the public hearing, it would come back for council consideration of third reading and council consideration of adoption. Should the bylaw be adopted, the applicant would then be required to apply for a development variance permit and at which point we would also be able to process the cannabis application in accordance with council policy, which is separate from the zoning bylaw that we are currently basing our review off of in conjunction with the OCP. So there would be a 3-application step process, and if all of those go through and are ultimately approved by council, because the other 2 subsequent applications, being the development variance permit and the cannabis application, both have to come to council. Should council approve those, staff would send the council resolution along with supporting documentation to the province. The province would issue their final approvals, and then the applicant would be able to complete the back end of the process, any interior renovations, business licenses, signage permits, all of that stuff.
Quite a process. Councilor Burson.
So to be maybe clear, so I voted against, or I voted for the original motion, which was to deny the permit. And really, I don't have an issue with the text amendment. It's the variance. As Councillor Juncker said, this is a new policy that's been put in place. I thought it was an excellent process. And I voted in favor of the one other variance, given the timing of the two things were in the hopper at the same time, and they had no way of knowing about that. So, but in general, I support this policy. So, because I'm not in favor of the variance permit, I'm going to vote against this motion now to just stop the process.
All right. Okay. Any other comments, councilors? Councilor Juncker and Councilor Sulz.
Yeah, can I ask a question, Mr. Mayor, about the public hearing?
Yes.
Or do you want me to wait till the next one?
No, you can ask.
Yeah, just curious, because in the report it talks about, and obviously in this COVID world of public hearings, it says alternate methods of public participation through electronic means will be considered. Could we just say, like, make it electronically?
Ms. Sloan?
Just $4,000, sorry, to me, $4,000 for something that I don't think is as, I don't know the right or wrong word to say, but comparing it to a large controversial development project in the community versus a text amendment, I just think is yikes.
Okay, Ms. Sloan?
Through your worship, I would agree. We would then monitor what was coming in and whether or not it became contentious, and maybe have to adjust to a little different location. But we would, the first attempt would be to hold it electronically.
Okay, thanks.
Councilor Sulz.
Just, this is the stage where we give the proponent a chance to defend what he's going to propose. We haven't even, we're shutting, if we say no or deny at this point, he has no opportunity to present his case to the public. You know, if it's key to his survival, maybe that's, we'll show some leniency, or the public might show some leniency, but he's just asking for the chance to do that. So if we shut it down at this point, he's not getting his chance in front of on the podium. And that's my take.
And every councilor has to weigh in for themselves based on what they feel and based on the policy that is put before you. So your decision is your decision, and I just encourage you to vote the way you feel is going to be best for you. Any further comments? So I'm going to call the question. So if you say yes, you're in approval of reading the first and second time. And if you say no, you're not in favor of that. That's correct, Ms. Lowe. And I'll ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? So because it's a tie, motion's defeated. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Okay, there we are. We're done.
Yeah.
The motion has been defeated. Thank you, councilors. Thank you, Mr. Simon. We're going to go on to item 9B. Fees and charges amendment by law. Someone want to put that on the table, Councilor Juncker?
Yeah, Your Worship, the fees and charges amendment bylaw number 2280 be read the first, second, and third time.
So seconder for the motion, Councilor Sherlatt. Discussion on the motion. Councilors, any questions? Councilor Juncker, you have your hand up.
I can't go?
Yes, you can.
Oh, okay, thanks. Couple questions. My first one is more so just a question about timing and whatnot. So, and maybe Ms. Lowe can answer or Ms. McCabe. Since we've were elected a few years ago with the fees and charges, the first year it came to us pretty late in the year, and the reasoning behind that was partially due to the election. And then last year, I'm not fully sure, and then this year, it came a little bit earlier to the Finance Committee and whatnot. But I guess my question is, when I was looking just around the province on how other municipalities do things, my issue that's popped up with me is that I feel like we somewhat seem to always be rushing to get this in at the last minute kind of thing. And I'm curious as to why we don't deal with water and sewer separately as part of the property tax review, which as some municipalities do, just because I find that we, in my experience being on council, we usually have a lot more time to really dive into the property taxes and budgets there, and not as much time to deal with water and sewer, which are still really large pieces. So I was just curious about
Okay,
that.
Ms. McCabe, do you want to weigh in?
I can't do your worship. So historically, going back a number of years, probably about a decade ago, we used to treat water and sewer. We used to get those ones through with the budget process. We received advice in probably about the last 5 years or so, telling us that if we don't have the bylaw in place before the end of the year, that the fees for the water usage and sewer cannot be charged for the full year. They can only be charged effectively date the bylaws passed. And so when we do the budgeting process, we budget as if those fees are for a full year. And so that's why we brought it all forward to do it earlier.
So I appreciate
Go ahead,
it.
follow up, yeah.
Yeah, just to clarify then, and I'm not saying that's a wrong policy or anything, I'm just asking, would it still not be possible though, and just looking down the road then, if you were to do it as part of the budget process, the new property taxes come in halfway through the year in July, would it not be possible to just kick in the water and the sewer at the same time there? Because our property taxes don't run from January 1st to December 31st, it's right around with these stuff, and so is it feasible?
To your worship, my understanding is it isn't, but I can certainly look into it again.
Okay.
I would need to get some advice on that. My understanding, property taxes are treated differently because the budget is for January to December, and the taxes are for January to December, but the deadline for approving them is May 31st, and not the legislation, or May 15th, sorry. Whereas the fees and charges for the water and utilities, like the water, sewer, garbage, are not specified in legislation.
Right.
And so the advice we were given was that it needs to be passed before the end of the year to be applicable for the full year.
Okay. That's fine. I'm just wondering, down the road when you have time, do you mind just getting back to us about the municipalities that do it as part of the budget when they apply their stuff? I'd just be curious to know that. Thanks.
Councilor Lynn, did you have a question?
I'm just cautious at this stage. There's a lot of stuff that we have to address on this COVID epidemic and what the implications are in our economy and our community. We're also addressing affordability in our town, and municipal charges or municipal issues that we have to confront or we pass on, they end up on the bottom line of housing price and affect our affordability. So I'm not keen to start raising prices or raising fees or percentage until we've actually addressed or had a real understanding of our affordability and what we can do about it. And I think that should be something we should be pushing for. Why are we facing an affordability issue? Why is the housing crunch affecting us so drastically here in our community? And I said, well, let's look at the root causes, and this might be one of them. I don't know. But someone should investigate our fees and our municipality issues to evaluate that.
Okay. Ms. McCabe, would you like to weigh in? Some of this has been kicked around the Finance Committee table, and so my understanding of some of the proposed fees, especially for the development services branch, are actual costs. But I'm asking for your guidance on this.
That's correct. These fees are meant to be based on a cost recovery basis, and so these adjustments are to reflect that. They aren't there yet, but they are closer. But the department is still subsidized to some extent through taxation. especially for the planning side of it, but for the building side of it and the development side of it, the idea is to have it as a cost recovery so that the people using the services are the ones paying for it.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Elliott, you have a question, and Councillor Juncker.
I think one of my issues that I would sort of bring when we get to finalizing the budget is efficiency and evaluating and streamlining government processes. And if that's something we should look at before we start charging fees for it, maybe we should do that.
Okay, so I think when we start looking at what it costs us to operate, so streamlining, I'm actually quite impressed with how our development services have worked this year. Some are not. During COVID, we've got things done and we've got things out, and I know that some people are not happy. But by the same token, these fees don't change all that much when it's cost recovery. Is that correct, Ms. McCabe, in that? So when I look at that, it's not about efficiencies. This is what it costs us to operate to get those things in. It can be construed as efficient or not, depending upon one's perspective. But when we look at the reality of it, this is what it costs us to operate at our best efficiencies. So, Councillor Charlotte, or Councillor Juncker had his hand up, then I'll go to you, Councillor Charlotte. Councillor Juncker.
Thanks. Yeah, further to just Councillor Elliott's comment question there, because the finance meetings aren't being recorded, so I didn't have a chance to see what happened. So forgive me if I'm asking what's already been answered at that meeting, but in regards to the actual fees, I don't really have an issue with the actual licensing and whatnot. My issue was just going to be around the water and the sewer more so, but I did have a question about why some fees in development services were actually going down though. Like the temporary use permit one, for instance, I think it was maybe 800 or 1,000, and there was a few other ones
That went down.
And I was curious about that, because if we're trying to cost recover, why are we dropping them?
Okay, so I'm going to ask Ms. McCabe or Ms. Wade to weigh in, and for clarity, when you get to the podium, if you could remove your mask so I can hear what you're saying.
Okay. Then I can see out of my glasses. Yes, Your Worship, through to Councillor Juncker. So in regards, we did, a part of our due diligence is that we look at comparatives with other municipalities, and we felt that was some of the permits that we were a bit on the high side, so we adjusted those to reflect what we felt would be our base cost recovery and in comparison with other municipalities. And if I could just go on and just talk a little bit about efficiency, because this is dear to my heart, is that we have various types of applications. We have those that are very well organized and understand the process, but come in and they don't take as much time through our process. Then there's others that don't understand the process as much and don't have the documents together, don't have coordinated packages, may not have the proper consultants, and we spend a lot of time trying to help and assist those. So, and we don't get cost recovery for that. So that is a service we go well beyond to try to help people get through the process. So I just wanted to say that we have to do a bit of a balancing act on that.
Right.
And then one of the things that we have brought in, that council did in approving the amendments to the development procedures bylaw, was that we can do third-party cost recovery, and you're going to see that effect in the budget this year, because we have been able to reach out, and we're starting that process. So, and that helps us with any third-party, like legal, environmental, or a skill base that we do not have in-house. And then that will eventually expand into actually staff time. So, because we're spending a lot of time managing certain projects, and that we'll be looking at that for the next year as well. So I wanted to let you know that I'm very, very, I want to really thank my team, because when I first came, building permits were taking up to 6 months, and we're down to 3 and 4 weeks with people who have well put together permits. So we have really, really improved the efficiency. We're also really have improved bringing the rezonings and the development permits forward in a much more timely manner. And I am also very grateful to the consultants and the applicants that we're working with that are working with us to help go through the process and provide the information. So it also takes the willingness of the developers and the builders and their consultants to work with us as well. And we listen to what they have to say and we adjust our process.
Great. Thank you. Councilor Ryan, do you have a question?
I do, yeah, just about the temporary use permits. So, I kind of have the same question as Cody, because even though we're trying to be on par with other communities, there's also a temporary use renewal fee. And I'm curious, like, when we just went through that process with the RMR application recently, it seems like a renewal is basically the exact same as a full application. So I'm wondering why we would even include a renewal fee that's lower than the original fee. Why wouldn't we just keep one fee? Because it sounds like the amount of work that is required is the same.
Ms. Wade, please.
So, Your Worship, so the renewal still has the advertising piece. And then, but we have a package that is already there. So there's more due diligence in the actual original application. And then we look at that information and bring it into the renewal process and bring it forward. Does that help?
So it's a little more streamlined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't think it makes sense to be reducing a fee and then also in putting in a new fee. I don't know. I guess I'm just thinking, who's going to be paying for these temporary use permits? And if you've already paid for one, then in theory it's because you're using that land and it's useful to you and you're doing good or whatever. And then if you have to renew it, I don't know why the fee should be that much lower. To me, it's honestly like it's not that much money, but it seems like an easy amount of money to just get from somebody who's not going to say no. And that's a terrible thing to say, but that's how I feel.
So, through your worship, so other municipalities have the temporary use permit and a renewal fee, and it is typically lower.
Okay.
It's lower because we've done the due diligence.
Okay.
And the renewal piece is easier because we have the reports and stuff we need. And the other thing is that we are hopeful that in the first time you do the temporary use permit, we try to encourage, is it going to go on and be rezoning or not? So staff is encouraging, the next step.
Is the next step as in rezoning?
Yeah, going to the rezoning. If that's the use that they want to continue with, then let's look at the rezoning piece.
But wouldn't a higher fee make them more incentivized to rezone? Is versus a renewal?
The rezoning OCP stuff, that fee is higher than the temporary use permit. So there's more work into doing that than there is in the temporary use permit.
Okay. So I'm sorry, I'm just a little confused by that last point. So you're saying in some cases it's good to encourage temporary use permits versus a rezoning?
What I'm saying is that the cost of doing a rezoning is higher than the temporary use permit or renewal. So what we ideally, under the legislation, you can do one more term. Council has the ability to say 3, 2, or 1, whatever they like, or not grant the temporary use permit. So those are all the choices you get when you do an extension. But that actual piece of work, so people would look at the temporary use permit, you're correct, as a more affordable option than actually going through the whole rezoning OCP. Mm-hmm. There could be other circumstances why you couldn't do it at that time too.
Okay, I want to get back on track here. So you have another question?
Yeah, just a comment. I was really glad to see that there's a fee for vehicle disposal. I know that the city's had lots of issues in getting rid of cars that are just left on the street and abandoned, so it's great to hopefully be able to get cost recovery on those.
Okay. Councilor Juncker, you have a question?
Yeah, about fees.
Okay.
Okay. Question question. One is that in 2018, with your council, Mr. Mayor, the issue came up around when the DCC bylaw was up that because of the lack of DCC revenue, there was almost $1 million had to be pulled out of the water reserve, like the general cap water reserve, to go over to subsidize this development triggered project. I'm curious if since 2018 and in the near future, are there any development projects planned that would require water capital being shuffled over?
Ms. McKay, do you want to weigh in on that, please?
Through your worship, I can't answer that question
Okay.
at this time. I'd have to look into that.
Okay.
My apologies.
Okay.
Totally fine.
right.
Follow up then.
Other question?
Yeah, at the finance meeting, when these fees were discussed, was there any discussion around like deferral of any water and or sewer projects for the year 2021 to try and reduce the expenditures in the upcoming year?
Ms. McKay.
Sorry, through your worship, I think we'll defer to Mr. Black.
Okay, Mr. Block.
We did not discuss anything in specific at that meeting. We did discuss I believe it was a 5% increase for water systems, O&M, and 10% for sanitary sewer projects. Specific projects, capital projects, we have not gotten yet into those discussions, and so we will be beginning those discussions, I believe, later this week, as far as reducing capital expenditure projects.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I guess my worry there is just committing to raising rates to this amount if before we've actually had that discussion around proper deferrals. We're doing the opposite with the property tax budget where staff are presenting and will present possible deferrals and whatnot, and then we base off of that what we set the tax rate at. Whereas with this one, I'm concerned that we're setting the rate and then after we've set that rate, discussing possible deferrals. Whereas if we had done that before, then we might have been able to identify, not us, but the professionals, that we can reduce this and thus don't need as much going in. Because the report that I had read, it was some O&M, but mostly to further bring up the reserves.
Ms. McKay, you had your hand up.
Yes, I do. Through your worship, the intention of the fee increase is to help build the reserves because the projects do need to get done. And so if we don't raise them this year, it's just delaying the pain, and we'd have to recoup that extra 5% next year instead of this year.
Yeah.
So the 5% amounts to average how much?
Oh dear.
I did the math.
How much?
It's on the. It's on there. It's in total when you combine sewer and water with the raises based on last year's. It's approximately $70 per household.
Okay.
And just I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I guess it might not seem like that much money. $70 spread over a year. But when you add that with additional property taxes, which hopefully we're going to keep lower this year, other factors, and just like the trend, like I understand that, us along with all other municipalities are facing a large infrastructure deficit, but I'm also looking at businesses struggling to stay open, crossing my fingers we don't see a closure this winter, tripling of the food bank usage in town. Like just something, like I was looking, just your worship, over the last 8 years, the sewer rates since 2012 have gone up 94% in the community. They were $16.25 a month in 2012. Now they're proposed doubling, $31.67 monthly, and the water is almost 54%. And we're still on pace. And I understand, again, like I'm all for infrastructure. I think our staff are doing a tremendous job with asset management and really getting there. I just don't believe this is a once in a lifetime, hopefully, global pandemic, and I'm just not sure I can support that big of increases right now.
Okay. Ms. McKay.
He is correct. The rate he's referring to, that when I first started, the sewer rates were $195 a year.
Yeah.
When that's compared to other municipalities, our rates are actually significantly lower. And now we're about the middle of the pack.
Okay. All right. Any other comments, questions, Councillor Brookshill?
When I did the math, I got $60 between water and sewer, and it would be $57 in the Big Eddy. 50.
I'm not sure I got 70.
You got 60. But I do agree with Councilor Juncker that I'm not sure. I understand that we need to be increasing our payments to reserves, but I'm not that comfortable with raising it that much this year.
Okay. So this came to Finance Committee. Two members of Finance Committee, do you want to weigh in? How do you feel about these fees and charges amendment bylaw? I know you brought up some things regarding some stuff, Councillor Ryan, Councillor Elliott. You brought up some things regarding development services. Now we're talking water, sewer. When we're talking around the table and talking about the amounts, they seem to be prudent to go forward. We did an incredible thing this year where we gave relief to those who needed relief regarding COVID, but we also want to try and stay on track. We're ahead of things in this community that other communities are not, because they made incredible cuts right off the bat, and we've tried to help those out off the bat versus making big stringent cuts. So I think we're on track to do this. We may need to look at some things as we go forward, or we may not. But Councillor Charlotte, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I definitely understand where Councillor Juncker and Councillor Brooks are coming from. This year's going to be tough for a lot of people, and raising fees hurts. Every little bit counts, and I'm wondering a couple of things. One, there's a mention in the report talking about extending some of the supports we did this year into next year. I think that's going to be an incredible tool. I'm wondering if there's room now for that discussion, just to understand what kind of relief could we offer for the folks that need it, because not everyone is struggling to the same extent. So I don't think it's responsible for us to cut the entire city's reserves to support folks when it's a blanket cut versus targeted supports. But I'd like to know what are our tools to provide those targeted supports. Because it's one thing to support businesses, but then there's also the residents. And we've talked about this before around this table, especially when it comes to assessments, where we charge the same water and sewer fee per residence, per unit, not per washroom. Yeah. So I was like, how can we start having that conversation? Is that in our tool chest, or is this something we can lobby the provincial government for? Because doing cuts to our water systems and our sewer systems that were so underfunded for so long, like, these are the essentials to life. We need those, but we do also need to take care of our people.
Right. So, Ms. McCabe and Ms. Lowe, do either one of you want to weigh in on this?
Through your worship, there's definitely some ability to look at the relief that was offered this year, particularly when it comes to commercial utilities, and what that may look like for relief, especially businesses having to close down again. We have had some conversations about that, and also to, oh dear, I just forgot my second thought.
Let's do the best of us.
Oh dear.
Okay, Ms. Lowe, do you want to, do you have something further to say, Ms. McCabe, or you just?
But it'll have to come back to me.
Okay. So, Ms. Lowe, I'm going to ask if there anything where we're talking about relief and plans and programs and whatnot. Are we at a point where we can actually discuss what we think we can do moving forward, or there's still a great amount of thought that we need to put into this? So, I'm asking.
So through your worship, Director of Finance has been looking into different types of relief that we could provide. Again, some of it's targeted towards businesses.
Right.
And then other could be targeted towards any type of increases. The province is giving money to local governments to help with that. So those are future discussions.
Okay.
Honestly, Mrs. McKay isn't prepared at this moment to come forward with that, but did mention it in the report so that council can keep it back.
So there may be ways that we can help others as we move forward. Okay. Councillor Juncker had his hand up, and then Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. I have a question as well, but just, I think actually valid to Councillor Choulette's point as well, is just as an example, is that there's some hostels and hotels in town, for instance, that like at the hostels where they'll have 8 or 10 rooms to maybe only 1 or 2 bathrooms, which the statistics have always showed the less bathrooms in buildings, the less usage. But then there's some newer ones that are having 1 or 2 bedroom suites with multiple bathrooms, same things as residents. So I definitely think that's hopefully something that we can look into, looking at the rates in the future, maybe a bit of a balancing thing there.
Sure.
Just in regards to the water reserves, and forgive me, maybe it was in that report, I couldn't find it, and I tried looking through the capital plan and couldn't find it either, so forgive me if it was there, but I'm just curious, what was the transfer to the water reserve in this current year, and then what is it next year?
So off the top of my head, I can't tell you what those numbers are. I can bring them back to you at a later date. The transfers to the reserves for the utility funds are based on the surplus at the end of the year in the utilities. So it's actually a number we budget for a certain amount, but then the actual amount at the end is based on results, the actual winning results.
Maybe, oh, sorry, maybe I worded that wrong. Like, what are we collecting via fees?
Water reserves?
Yeah, sorry,
Yes.
I worded that wrong.
No, you're actually fine. I can't tell you off the top of my head, sorry, what the budgeted reserve transfer was going to be for the water reserve.
Okay.
But whatever the budgeted amount is, we budget to transfer not just a flat amount, we actually budget to transfer any surplus. So we take the revenues collected less all the operating expenses, and anything left over goes to the capital reserves. So that's where it's different for me. Yes. Yeah.
Or the utility rather, sorry.
Utility, yes.
Councillor Elliott?
I'm just curious, what did we contribute, what did we give as a concession to the taxpayers this year in terms of easement on our tax burden? We just allowed the no interest charges on late payments, is that right? And deferred the payments from the deadline of July 1st to September 1st. Is that the only concession we did?
So, do you want to weigh in, Ms. Flo, or Ms. McKay? Okay, Ms. Flo, you're prepared to answer, go ahead.
Your Worship, we also allowed for buildings to apply for utility relief.
The business commercial
That
version.
were shut down due to COVID.
So
we
the-
did actually give relief there as well.
Do you know how much was lost in that?
For all the utilities, in total, it's approximately $55,000 in relief that was applied for. Yeah.
Relief, so we just wiped that off our books.
We did, yes. We did apply for.
Thank you.
Answers your question. Any further questions on the motion on the table? Go ahead, Councillor Yoder.
Yeah, just, well, I have my own, but just to that, through you, Mr. Mayor, would that be a possible expenditure that could be covered then via the provincial?
That may be something that we can look at, yeah.
Because that's like a COVID loss
Yeah.
revenue kind of thing? Okay, yeah, I was just curious about that, so that's good there. Yeah, just in regards to the actual water and sewer fees, I'm not suggesting that we should be going 0% or cutting any fees at all or anything like that. And I know for a long time, they were pretty low. I mean, hindsight's 2020, though. At the time, you can ask those councils, and they'll probably tell you they were getting ripped to shreds by the public to keep fees and taxes low. But I just think that we need to do a really good job this year balancing needs with optics and what the community can afford. And I think right now it might come off as if on our first big decision around budget 2021, if we pass 5 and 10%, in my opinion, we're kind of just looking full steam ahead, which I'm not saying is irresponsible because it's good to budget and asset management. But I look and, today, for instance, the city of Kamloops is literally budgeting down to the temperature in their city hall to try and scrape every penny.
Right.
So I just think that maybe somewhat of a reduction for the year 2021 would be, in my opinion, appropriate. But I'm not at all suggesting any cuts, just more so a slowing for this year to what's going to that reserve, that's all. And hoping at the same time there's a lot more federal money coming. But just to that point, in the last year capital, or in the last year's annual report, in the department breakdown, under the water, one of the big ones was, I think it was about 3 million or 3.5 million, it says in the little blurb there, for the RMR water reservoir upgrading. So I'm just seeking some clarification about that reservoir we briefly discussed about. Is that still, that's all being tied into the stuff going on RMR? Is that still, that reservoir, is that still being funded now solely by the city?
Can I ask Mr. Black for clarification?
Through your worship, that project is a reservoir that the mountain RMR is designing and building in order to service parts of the resort area. We are now determining whether that reservoir itself will provide benefit to other parts of the community, in which case we would then share that cost with the mountain because they need this reservoir. If we get some benefit and we do not have to build another reservoir at another location or provide additional fire storage at another location, then we share that cost. And so the mountain is building it. We're doing an evaluation to understand what that benefit is to us, if any.
Right.
If there is benefit, then we would come back and say, here's what we're looking to do. So that money was put aside because when I arrived here, I didn't have a clue as to what the big picture looked like for the water system. We're getting closer now with the water model, trying to understand where the development's occurring. And so those, that understanding is coming together.
Right.
And yes, that money is set there. We don't know what the expenditure is. It's a safe amount. Whatever is left over will go back into the reserves. If that's,
yeah.
I hope I'm answering your question.
Yeah, completely. And I think just, yeah, that's a terrific answer. Thanks. And I think just to my point was that, yeah, originally when that was explained was that would be the cost if the city was to fund it.
Yeah.
But which appears we won't be fully funding it.
No.
So then we've which is a good thing. I like over budgeting, but there is, we don't know how much, as Mr. Black indicated, there is going to be some funds in there, that aren't going to be used, that's all, for that project. Just something.
So any further clarification on that, Mr. Black or Ms. McCabe? Okay. All right, seeing none. So I'm going to get back to the motion on the table about the fees and charges bylaw. I'm satisfied that we kicked this around the Finance Committee table and the fees, but I also look at some of the money that's come in from the government during the COVID stuff, and we may be able to assist residents in some way with these increase in fees. So where we may be able to make it a wash, I'm not exactly sure on that, but those are thoughts that I have and thoughts that we can discuss this around the committee table and bring to the public and some support in dealing with this sort of stuff. So any further comments, Mr. Ryan?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think the utilities are not something that I'd be comfortable reducing at this point. I think those are the critical pieces of infrastructure that we've been neglecting and that need the money. And that if, I agree, this is a tough year, so reducing service level for things like nice flowers downtown and, things like that make more sense than putting off the inevitable and then it costing the same group of people more money down the road. I was actually in favor of increasing them more, so I guess this seems reasonable to me.
Okay. Councillor Elliott and Councillor Junker.
Just overall, I think it's reckless to start raising fees and taxes in an uncertain time. And I think I realize the infrastructure and some key things need to be addressed, but we are in such a quandary right now about where we're going to be in the next year. To jump into it with the fees increases are so off base in my book, so I won't be in support of this one.
Okay. And then when we kicked this around the finance table, you were okay or not okay with
No,
that?
I wasn't. I did have some issues with it.
Yep.
And I think it was going down 2-1.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Junker.
Just a point of clarification on what you were saying, Mr. Mayor. So in terms of the COVID funding, I just think that it's important to know, as Ms. McCabe said, that in my opinion, that will want to be more so used in order to plug holes of lost revenue. But if we try and attempt to use that money to decrease potential taxes, pardon me, all you're doing is like we had the issue with the tax reduction last year, is if we just cut services, we still were going to be missing that revenue in the following year. So if we plug it with COVID money and then continue to spend, then when the COVID money's not there, we still need that revenue in the following year, similar to what Ms. McCabe was saying, or we just slow the growth of expansion or expenditures. But to the COVID money, thanks province and feds for that. So.
Okay, Ms. Lee, you want to weigh in? You pulled your mask off, or you're okay? Councilor Bergstrom.
I'm okay with the raising of the general fees, like, garbage going up $2, these things are, and the development services fees. I'm still concerned a bit about the sewer and water, but I would be okay with it as long as I know that there's the ability to have the targeted help where it's needed, such as with the businesses, but also something for residents who are suffering as well. Some way that they can say, look, these things are going to come due later, so they can say, look, 2020, like my income went down 50% or 100% or something. Can you please give me help? And if there's some remedy there, then I'm okay with this, because I think we should be targeting our help to those who need it, not broad-based things. Increasing these things, as Councillor Ryan says, increasing the sewer and water rates are helping the whole community in the long term. And that's really important. And so if we can target the people who are really needing help right now, I think that's really important.
Good. I appreciate that. I think that's a good choice. Councillor Sherlock, did you have your hand up?
I agree with
Okay. Councillor.
I was just going to say, I agree with that. That statement, and just maybe some clarification from Ms. Lowe, though, in terms of residential, what sort of things are possible? Because I just recall when we were talking pre-summer for residential, the topic of discussion kind of around residential, like we had kind of more flexibility with the businesses around patios and that kind of thing. But I recall the conversation for residences was basically slowing of increases because we can't go and start writing checks for residents, or I'm not sure, because that was kind of the conversation we had. It's really just slowing of taxes or a reduction was my understanding, whereas with businesses we could offer extension of hours, patio usage, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that makes sense. So, Ms. Lowe, do you want to weigh in? And so when I look at this sort of thing, to assist the homeowner, then we're going to get down to what we can do for them from a tax perspective. Is that not it? Am I off base there? Do you want to weigh in?
No, that's exactly right. And also, correct me, Ms. McCabe, with respect to the money that we are receiving from the federal government, if there's a possibility of helping the residents of the community, if there's so much of a raise on water and sewer, can we do credits? There's a few things that we're actually looking into right now that we're going forward for council.
Through your worship, we're definitely reviewing what is allowable expenditure and what is not. And so for this A is a little bit up in the air. Still, there's a lot of discussion going on, and I have a lot of resources that I'm reaching out to right now to confirm what we can use the money for.
Okay.
Ms. was right. The tax increase will be more where we can help the residential, and then businesses will be through.
So we are moving more into researching that. And we're being given the money to be able to do it.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Councillor Young?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's important to explore the possibilities. I just think, as Ms. McCabe stated, we just don't know what the possibilities
are at this point
to do it. And yeah, in terms of property taxes, I mean, the same thing to help residents would be just not raising them a lot, right?
Yeah.
But again, I don't think it would be a COVID expenditure because you're delaying there. But so I see more options for the businesses. I'm not sure what options are for the residents yet. That's all.
Okay, Councilor Elliott and Councilor Ryan.
I just think we're at a time where we have an opportunity to rethink how we run our business, how we run this, where we reallocate our resources. If we get $2-3 million from the federal government, we're going to give it to the taxpayer who can support our city services in the same manner we're going. They're just taking it from the taxpayer, just filtering it in a weird way. We have $3 million to put into something different, a new way of thinking, a new, a strategic plan on how to go forward. That makes more sense to me. If we're going to keep taking the money from the federal government and put it onto our municipal tax dollars, makes no sense to me.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we don't raise the fees, then that's a long-term issue, whereas COVID, I mean, who knows, it could be a long-term issue too, but it seems more temporary in the grand scheme of things. So like Councilor Brookshill was saying, if you can target the help to the people that need it most, I think that makes the most sense. My thoughts escape me. I had something. Oh, if I think about it, I will say it. That's annoying.
So I'm going to ask one last time, any more comments on the fees and charges bylaw before I ask a question? Councilor.
I'm separate from the water and sewer, just my own experience with fees this year. It's like a really minor one, but maybe it's a productivity thing to help. Like the dog licensing fee, Miss Lowe, the fee for like paying yearly versus paying for a lifetime is basically two in the same. Like it's not much difference, and so I just think it's something to be looked at next year. It might just narrow down unnecessary work or whatever for staffing, and as well with the licensing there, the form was like asking for like rabies and neutering and pictures and stuff like that, which would help the bylaw officers. But when I did our dog this year, they said none of it was required. So it just seems just a clerical thing to help clean up. I think it's just redundant. It might help save staff time.
Okay. Councilor Ryan, your thought?
Yeah, I remembered it. Okay, so because the utilities is ongoing and COVID is shorter, I feel like if we don't increase taxes because for utilities because of COVID, then you are helping taxpayers with $70 or $60 a household, but like it also doesn't consider that there are a number of households who probably saved money this year. Maybe they're not, I don't know, going out. Maybe they were able to work remotely. Maybe they came from a city and have a bunch of money and bought a house. So that you're not imposing those fees that are necessary. Whereas, yeah, if you can target the ones that do, I think that's much better. So I'm fully in support of raising the fees.
All right. So I might call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? No. Councilor Juncker and Councilor Elliott are opposed. The motion is carried. Thank you. We're going to move on to item 9C, Business License Amendment Bylaw. Someone want to put that forward, please? Councilor Brookshill.
The Business Licensing and Regulation Amendment Bylaw number 2281 be read first, second, and third time.
Is there a seconder for the motion, please? Councilor Charlotte, discussion on the motion. Any comments, any concerns? Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 11A, staff reports. Community Economic Development, grant funding application. Do we have a presentation? Ms. Braun.
So this is funding that was provided to the Ministry of Tourism because of the work of Mayor Sulz and COO. They were able to work with the other resort tourism communities and secure a source of funding just for tourism-dependent communities. So there's 33 communities in the province that apply for up to $1 million per community. And the city's identified 3 municipal projects that will make use of the funding opportunity, and they've been outlined for you in the report. So applications are due on Friday. I'm working with staff to get them done, almost there. And what we looked at with the management team was projects that would normally cost either taxpayers' dollars or were recommended by the Recovery Task Force or were part of the resort development strategy, but that we can't quite get to in this iteration. So the priorities identified were preservation and upgrading of the greenbelt trails, the washroom facilities at Woodenhead Park, installing permanent washroom facilities there. Again, that was an issue this past summer. And then additional upgrades to Williamson Lake that were not part of the RMI project funds identified for shower facilities. This would be specifically for improving the docks and pathways down in water, I believe. So all of these projects, those meet the aims of allowing visitors and residents to safely distance outdoors and get outdoors, and saves the city some in costing, and are within actual strategies and recommendations that back them up. So we've got a strong rationale for doing these, and we do have plans and costing for these things we can pull together really quickly. So any questions at all?
Councilor Juncker?
Yeah, Your Worship, thanks, Ms. Braun. We talked about this the other day at the TIC meeting, and the committee was overwhelmingly supportive of Ms. Braun doing this. It's terrific. I mean, if there's money to be had, go and get it, essentially. I'll just reiterate a couple things that I had said on the call. My opinion was that I think with the Woodenhead Park, the washroom facilities obviously was identified as a huge issue this summer, more so because of COVID, but I think it's going to be an ever-increasing issue as we see more growth along that highway corridor. One of the things I said that I think it's also important to note that it actually is an issue, just not as noticeable in the wintertime as well. So I think it would be redundant, not a wise idea to not winterize that thing and make sure we can make use of it all year round. Ms. Braun might have noted to you guys, but tourism had some reservations about putting a washroom facility out there because they felt that maybe people would then just pull in there, use the washroom, and continue on. I'd like to say I actually see it as the complete opposite. I think if we do it properly, what I would prefer to see is a beautiful washroom facility, but with also a large permanent structure of a city map with identified, this is where the railway museum is, this kind of thing. So that way people, maybe they stop, they weren't necessarily coming into Revelstoke, but now they've stopped, they've used the washroom, grabbed a burger, they see this map of things to check out, and instead of just seeing the Revelstoke sign and turning around and going back to the highway, maybe now the map said, let's go check it out, we've got a few hours to spare, right? So I just think maybe if we could factor that in, Mr. Black or whoever, when we're doing the washrooms. But other than that, I think this is terrific. I'm really appreciative of you working so fast and hard to get this done. And yeah, it's terrific. Cross our fingers.
And I think that's what we were talking about when Ms. Braun, where we had some sort of a map on the building or beside the building so that we could direct people to other amenities in our community.
Yeah, a couple comments regarding that is it was scoped out the wayfinding sign, and we provide tourism kiosks, but it wasn't part of the initial pricing for phase one. It was way, way down the priority list. But again, echoing tourism's concerns, and it was only mentioned by one or two people. In fact, the developers or development strategy, we did indicate that all visitor arrival areas should be upgraded, and we had to pick one over the other, so we picked the VIC. But in this case, this is a perfect opportunity to make a good first impression on visitors, and again, with the Recovery Task Force recommendations, alleviate those issues of overflowing washrooms.
I think too further to that, I forget his last name. He's gonna kill me.
Parks Canada?
Yeah, Rick.
Rick Reynolds.
From Parks Canada, has worked there for decades. Made a really good comment on the call that we had the other day that in all their studies that Parks Canada has done, of rankings of campsites and parks, the end-all be-all was whether or not you had good accessible washroom facilities. And the VIC has been brought up, but it's not going to be open most of the winter, and those are easily accessible. So I think this takes us to the next level as well for a great community to visit.
I agree 100% with that.
It does.
I look at that. Councilor Collette?
Everybody eats.
Supposed to written on that one. Anyways, finding washrooms in cities is a big challenge, especially after COVID. Now, this is another topic we've talked about before, and I'm just thinking of it now in the sense that as we make these grants applications and we're putting in these washroom facilities with plumbing in place, where does a water bottle filling station fit in this scheme? Because we've talked about it before, they're expensive, I get it. This is a grant application. This is reducing single-use plastic. Can this be rolled in, and can we get into that habit in some way that we're always incorporating a bottle filling station?
And why couldn't we have that on the outside of this building if we have an insulated building where people can just fill their water year-round?
Your Worship, we are scoping it out for the VIC improvements. That is part of it. As there is a water filling station that's fully accessible, adjacent to accessible washrooms. So we could easily take some of those plans and back that structure and work with Steve Black and see if we can build that into plans. Not sure how it works outdoors on a winterized building, but we can look at the options.
Well, it could be put in a washroom as well.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah, inside the
that sort of thing is. What's that? Ms. Lowe, please ask the question.
So, I feel like the washroom upgrades are growing, and we're going from temporary washrooms to permanent winter structures with water bottle plants inside them or water filling stations inside of them, and I'm not sure that was the intent. You've got here, if council so chooses, perhaps we only apply for 2 programs.
Your Worship, yes, it's absolutely true that these should be scalable. They asked us to identify the priorities. So we've put these in priorities as recommended by TRC staff, but certainly interested to hear your feedback.
Through your Worship, the money that's being given is given to municipalities for tax reductions, or to take the burden off of the taxpayer. That's the money that the mayor and myself lobby for. So to me, if we're looking at a facility that's updated to, was this supposed to be a winterized facility, this cost? Because in discussions with the management team, I thought it was just summer washrooms.
I'm still waiting on the final costing from city staff. But
Okay.
yeah, so if it is...
I just want to be cognizant of it. If we just apply for 2, then maybe that's better. And do half and half instead of making 3 programs where we're not taking into consideration the full price. I just don't want to set council up for an expectation that they're going to have this winterized washroom. What was applied for was just a summer washroom.
Right. Yeah, and to be fair, we haven't actually got the final cost of any of these projects yet, so that might change how much we can ask for it, and it needs to be scalable. So we also have to break out the cost into specific pieces. So, for instance, Williams Lake, a job will cost this much. This will cost, so that we can mix and match if we have to. Okay.
Councilor Charlotte and Councilor Ryan.
Perfect. And just to clarify on that, of course, if it's not realistic, that's totally fine. I would not expect a water bottle filling station to be put in if it's not practical. I just want to hear that if we've considered it, that if it does work, it would be great to start including those more and more. And if it doesn't, fair enough.
And so as we move forward too, I'm not sure how many fountains we have in the community that are outside. Is there any in Queenie Park? Is there any, I don't believe there's any in Woodmead Park, but you look at that sort of thing, and can those be converted over in a simplistic way? And when I say simplistic, it might not, right? Like I would say, no, we need to take this whole thing down and start it. But, so that's another conversation. Councilor Ryan.
Yes, I just need some clarification. So you were mentioning that you were lobbying to get this funding to reduce the burden on taxpayers, but it still has to be like tourism related.
Right.
So you kind of have to sell it as like, this is an asset that we have that we need to maintain anyways, but if we improve it or we put in a washroom facility, then now it's more attractive to tourists and it might incentivize them to stay a little longer. So that's what these projects are. They're kind of like two purposes being, okay. So then, I really like the green belts trails because I really thought it was smart that you had mentioned that it also encourages residents and visitors to spend time physically distancing. It also is connecting the city better, but we don't know how long COVID's going to be around for, so that does seem to do a good job. I'm a little hesitant to see the washroom facility and the upgrades to Williamson Lake because, Williamson Lake, I suppose, is a city-owned asset, and then so would be the new washroom facility, but there would be additional operating expenses in running these buildings beyond what this grant funding provides, so I don't know if that is a future tax burden, or no?
Well, it could be, or we may need to look at ways that we use marketing money or infrastructure money that comes through the tourism base to help.
For operating?
Yeah,
Can we do that though?
that depends on how it's worded. I guess.
We can use, there's a section of our funds that cover basic services, we'll talk about later this evening, in regards to transit and those kinds of services, but it's, yes, there's a limit, there's a limit on how much you can use for operating expenses for service delivery.
Right. Whereas I know that the Greenbelt has great volunteers, and also we also already do some maintenance, so maybe the implications wouldn't be so big there. But
Well, I mean, we have some parts of that green belt that need to be dealt with because of trees and roots and stuff.
For sure.
It's starting to break apart, so we need to keep that maintained at some point. Councilor, you have the question?
Yeah, just to clarify, Ms. Lowe's comments kind of confused me a bit, but what did you mean, sorry, by the reducing, like you mean like the tax burden through
The taxpayers don't pay for
these items? Yeah, so I think, okay, so that's how I understood it and then read through the report, and I went and pulled our capital project list. Bathrooms at Wooden Head's not on there because I didn't see it. But it's something that the Tourism Initiatives Committee has really talked about, and we saw it really this year. But the Greenbelt upgrades are on there, and the Williamson Lake, there's quite a substantial amount of money that, like, there's $50,000 in the capital for the dock, $350,000 for other stuff, another couple hundred. There's a lot of money there. So I think, personally for me, I think the Williamson Lake one is really big because we actually already have a lot of allocated funding in the reserve already there, which if we can use Williamson Lake as an example for a lot of this funding, maybe more than the 150, then we are really saving the taxpayer. We're getting more bang for our buck. The hope is that when we build these new buildings there, that it actually reduces your maintenance costs and that kind of thing. So yeah, then you suddenly now have $400,000 or $500,000 in your capital reserve that we can reallocate to something else, or again in a year maybe we don't have to add as much to the reserve because we have a larger chunk of change. So if Ms. Lowe is in, like, with her recommendation of maybe going for like 2, for me I would go with the Greenbelt and the Williamson Lake would be my opinion.
Yep. Okay.
So, Your Worship,
Yes.
I'm absolutely fine with the way that this report is drafted out in support of 3. I just didn't want the council to have an expectation that the washroom was going to be something bigger than it was, that what we were thinking about in our minds. That's
Right.
But I agree that those are 3 really good projects that we will, 2 of them were in the budget, and 1 was going to be added.
And just to clarify, Mr. Mayor, if we received the full funding, like we, as Ms. Braun indicated, we have to submit the projects and submit some rough costing. If we receive the full funding, are we then obligated to do all 3, or could we come back to council and be like, this is the money we had, these are the projects we were thinking, we can get these 2, or like a combination kind of thing, so we're not...
So how's the grant application, Ms. Braun, worded? Do we have a flexibility, or once we put the application in, it's designed to go towards the projects that we apply for?
I believe it's designed to go towards the projects we apply for. It is scalable. You can maybe switch out parts and scale our parts down and scale other parts up, but I believe that you are expected to carry out the product.
So, Councilor Elliott.
We had a trail strategy developed a number of years ago, and it was kind of set aside for a while. Is there elements that need to be completed on that, or we're struggling to make it work? Maybe some of this money can be allocated to that. Just on that.
Thank you, Worship. One of the challenges with the trail strategy is a lot of the new development is on BC Hydro lands, which is very, very difficult to pull out of BC Hydro and build on. So a trail strategy is developed without an eye to those actual timelines or the costs involved. So what we are doing with our R&I funds is also to implement parts of the trail strategy within municipal boundaries, and that's going to be part of the improvements to the multi-use trail along Airport Way, connecting with the resort ultimately.
All right, so getting back to this, I'm supportive of all 3. I'm supportive of this application being put through. We don't have it on the table yet, so I'm going to ask somebody to put that on. Councilor Brookshill, you have your hand up.
Yep, the application be submitted to the Tourism Dependent Communities Fund Program for funding to support key tourism municipal infrastructure projects.
And Councillor Junker, you're seconding that. Any further discussion on this, Councillor Junker?
Yeah, just a quick thing then. Could I just ask that, assuming hopefully that we get the grant, that the staff come back to us and to talk about the scalability of the projects?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm full support, obviously.
Okay. Any further comments? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Braun. Moving on to engineering, Lakewood Waste Management Plan, our favorite subject, Mr. Block.
Do you want me to put it on, or is there?
Yes, please.
That McElhaney Limited be awarded the contract for the completion of phases 2 and 3 of the liquid waste management plan in the amount of $93,470 plus GST.
Second for the motion, please, Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Junker, you have your hand up. Mr. Block, you want to just talk about this for a bit?
Unfortunately, Your Worship, I did not prepare a presentation because I was under the impression that this would satisfy all of council's needs for the next few months. With all due respect. In honesty, this is a really good proposal. I know I attached it to the report. I don't know if any of you had a chance to review it. I'm very pleased with the detail that came out. And more importantly, I'm really excited about the budget that came with it. It is well within our budget for last year. I do apologize that we're only getting to this project at this point in this year. However, the proposal was to complete this project in approximately 5 or 6 months, which is critical as part of leading the discussions on the OCP, the DCCs, stormwater management, liquid waste management, sanitary sewers, and in addition supporting the grant application that we submitted back in March in the amount of $10 million. And so the completion of this aspect of the liquid waste management plan provides great credibility to our grant application, and as that has not been released yet, I'm hopeful that we can complete this quickly, and that will give our application for the grant more credibility.
Appreciate it. Councilors, comments, Councilor.
Yeah, so are you suggesting that this is maybe like a requirement before, like we should complete this before we do OCP and DCCs?
Yes.
And it's going to take 5 months?
That is the schedule proposed by the consultant to complete this. The DCCs, until we know exactly what our wastewater treatment plant looks like and what our requirements are under federal and provincial law are, we cannot then determine what the costs are for that new facility in addition to operating the facility. If we go to a fully mechanical plant, all concrete, small, we would probably need to hire 6 people with Class 4 licenses, which is going to be extremely expensive from a utility operating standpoint. And we would also be required to extend all the sewer in town under a given timeline and try and get everybody off septic. And so in order to fully understand the cost just for the sanitary sewer, we need to know what that looks like from a long-term perspective. We are hopeful that we can continue to use our sewage lagoons with continuous improvements so that we minimize those costs and reduce the opportunity to have to bring in higher qualified operators for that plant to keep the costs as low as possible for the community. And so, long story short, once we know what the big picture plan looks like for build out of our community, then we can then allocate the cost to new development, allocate the cost to residents based upon whether development is driving those things. And so that's the basis behind our future DCC bylaw.
Can I ask a follow-up?
follow up, and then I'm going to Councilor Juncker.
So a couple things. The first is that we've been told as a council that the DCC's update is quite a long process where there's a lot of education to council about what goes into it. So my first point would be, if it's going to take 5 months to get this completed, it might make sense to start on the DCC's track sooner than later, since maybe by the time, we're educated enough to make that vote or whatever, then that'll align well with when this report is complete. And then the other thing is that I've also been told that if the projects on the list, because you were saying we're hopeful we can continue to use the lagoons with some upgrades, so like if we were just including that as the project, but then it turns out in 5 months' time that it's not, could we not just make an amendment at that point if the DCC's list hasn't passed, or even if it has as a minor update to the project list?
We can do that, however, it is not comprehensive. By not having a full-blown plan for this piece of infrastructure, we would only be capturing one component. It might be the biggest component there is, but overall, if we miss those other components that should be charged to development versus the local residents at this point in time, the burden then falls back on the taxpayers when potentially some of that could be charged to new development. That is my caution in pursuing a small improvement or a change to the DCCs, because the big picture is what's critical.
So we can't start, increase DCCs and then make an adjustment?
My understanding is that Councilor Ray, did approach the province, and I'll just be quiet. Because she has got a better story.
So just to recap, so in order to do the DCCs and go to the province and ask for the projects, that's part of the update to the OCP, where the liquid waste management, the master transportation plan, parks, and all those things come into play. So we know what all those projects are, so we can go to the province and say, here's the DCC qualified projects, here's the list, this is what we want to amend, this is the cost. So that's how this works to move forward with the DCCs.
So just a point of clarification, is that then suggesting that the DCCs wouldn't come until after the OCP?
They would be an outcome of the OCP.
Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and say that I absolutely do not think that that's the right approach. There's going to be so much development. I mean, I'm sure it is technically the right approach. I think it's logically, if there were no repercussions, that makes a ton of sense. I think practically, we should consider that there's going to be a lot of really big development, like the golf course and all the other development that brings along with it. And if we don't increase DCCs like yesterday, then that's just all kinds of money that we're not going to see. So my suggestion would be, if there's any way that we can get DCCs in front of us as soon as possible, that yes, it's maybe not the most comprehensive approach, but we're going to learn a lot more information over the next 2 years when those other reports get completed, and if we have to make an adjustment, we make an adjustment.
Thank you. Ms. Wade, you want to weigh in, and then I'm going to go to Councilor Juncker.
So just to, and Mr. Blackman jumps in the time once, is that in order for us to make the case to the province, we have to have the supporting technical studies that justifies that these are DCC projects. So that's what we need. And unfortunately, these plans, just so everybody knows, were identified back in 2011, 2010 with the OCP update, and here we are today. So they are really critical in us bringing the OCP in the line, understanding with our population projections, and also with our climate action pieces, where we can put development and the impacts and how they actually become community benefits, so that we can identify them as a DCC project and make that case to the superintendent.
Good. All right, thank you for that. I think we're going to have more conversations on DCCs as we go forward. Mr. Black, you want to weigh in?
If I might add, Your Worship, lastly, all of these components require significant community involvement, so that the community is aware of these implications, to not only to the taxpayers but to the development community. And so it's in our best interest, in my opinion, that we pursue these projects as laid out and bring them forward with community behind the results, so that council has the community behind that effort. Thank you.
Okay, you
Yeah, I have a
follow up?
question. Okay, so I know that we went through the whole DCC's things based on an outdated list of projects. So let's just say that we didn't want to be comprehensive and we just wanted to increase rates based on those projects. That is an expensive process, I'm understanding, and it's a lot of work. But let's say it costs, I don't know, like throw a number at it, like $100,000 or something. Is that crazy? Is it too high? I hope it's too high. I don't know. But even if it was, or is that too low?
It's probably, the process itself,
Yeah.
that's probably around that amount.
Okay.
And it depends how we use our OCP engagement to Mr. Black, so that we can get the public support.
But the point is like, even if we pay that money now, then will we not recoup that in all the development that we're going to see in the next 5 years between, us getting an OCP completed and then going back to the DCCs with a better list of projects? Like, it almost seems worth it to do it twice.
Okay, so we're going to have that discussion as we move along with DCCs. I want to get back to the motion that's on the table.
Okay, but that's totally fine. That's you doing your job. But with all due respect, we've been asking for DCCs for 2 years, so this is frustrating.
I get it.
Good.
I get it. Councilor Juncker?
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so Mr. Mayor, Mr. Black answered the question about the timing. One of the things I just wanted to know was, because my understanding was we still hadn't heard back on the application that we had made for the first upgrade, like the phase 1 of the plant. So 2 things. One, are we going to be contacting the province being like, hey, by the way, we're doing this now, to show them so they know we're like legit? And the second question is then, as Mr. Black's indicating then, that this is going to more so indicate the actual cost, the type of building, that kind of thing. Why then was there a report done only a few years ago indicating what it was going to be, when the phases were going to be in, and why are all these massive dollar figures then being budgeted for if we really don't actually have an idea of what's happening? Or maybe I'm misunderstanding there.
Mr. Black, you want to weigh in?
Yes, Your Worship. I think the first question you asked has gone by my brain at this point.
Oh, just did we tell the province? Are we telling the province that we're doing this?
Through Your Worship, absolutely, absolutely. That will be the first task that this consultant will undertake, is to inform the province that we are re-engaging in this process and looking to complete it as soon as possible to further add the credibility to our grant program. The projects that are laid out in the wastewater treatment plant were originally identified in, I believe it was 2007 by Dayton and Knight Consultants, many, many moons ago. So we are continuing along that same path of lagoon process to treat our wastewater. As the regulations have changed and as we get closer to the limits of our discharge permit, we are going to be required to upgrade to that new level. So we're hoping that this is the path that is of least resistance, not only to the province, but the community will be behind it because it is the most economic solution to our long-term treatment of wastewater.
Okay.
So that is why we're pursuing the grant program parallel and prior to completion of this. And as you know, this process was terminated in, I think, 2008 or 9 because council was not happy with the results of it and the costs that are associated with that. So we're still in that position. We need to finish the process.
Can I just clarify, Mr. Mayor? I was reading up on these liquid waste management plans, and my understanding is kind of here in the report that it's actually pretty community consultation heavy words. Yeah. Like we have to go to the community a lot and really work with them on this, because this is going to kind of actually really dictate where sewer fees are going to go, is my understanding. I was just reading on, again, Google, other municipalities that had done them, and it was, yeah, quite something, because it was telling municipalities that, by the way, you know, in some, like, your fees are going to go up to 300, or if this is the service you want to see, kind of thing. So different options. So I'm glad to know that this will be a heavily, you know, consultation process in the COVID world. Yeah, so I'm really glad to see that this is being done finally and getting going. Is the 5-month kickoff going to hopefully be within 2020, or is it going to be 5 months kicked off in January, or?
I'm hopeful that we'll be kicking it off in the next few weeks.
Okay.
There's a lot of groundwork that we need to undertake. We need to establish some committees again. I'm hopeful that we did not terminate all of those committees when the original liquid waste management plan was completed or stopped, so that we can just get everything rock and rolling right away.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it. Just to, I don't want to go off track too much, but just in regards to Mr. Black's comments on the DCCs, and I think that's a conversation we'll be having in the next couple of weeks, hopefully again. But I just look at it and go, you know, since the water fees and the sewer fees we're just discussing continue, you know, the residents are walking around the monopoly board and they're paying every time they pass go, but the monopoly man of the big developer, which we need development coming into town, he's not paying his 200. And I think it's really important to note that residents are continuing to pay more and more and more in sewer, and the hookup fees for developers has not changed. And while I understand the need that Ms. Wade and Mr. Black are indicating around the OCP and Master Transportation Plan, it concerns me. I mean, in one hand, I'm really grateful to hear that from them, but on the other hand, it concerns me knowing that only a couple of years ago, if that went through, then it might have been possibly rejected by the province or been incorrect because it was based off of incomplete information then.
Well, I'm not sure.
And a lot of money wasted.
It's easy to go back and say, well, this is what could have happened, but it was stalled. We didn't go forward.
Right, but I'm saying that you didn't have the master transportation, you didn't have the liquid waste management.
Nope.
So if that's necessary to actually do the bylaw, then yeah, I'm just going, how did that?
Yep.
So anyways, thanks.
Councillor Lloyd?
Just reading through your report there, Steve, it says we're licensed up to 4,100 meters. That's what this province dedicates to Revelstoke. And over the last number of years, we've had 2,600 as our discharge. Yeah. What's our capacity of the facility that we have?
If we spend the $30+ million, we'll be able to address the community's needs through build out. The first step of the $13 million, I believe, will last us for another 10, 15 years. And we can save up for the rest if it's needed.
So one of the issues that when we got to the last DCs, we had $30 million as the big prize there that we had to spend, or a big amount we had, and we had to collect our DCCs accordingly. You're saying we have an opportunity to get $10 million of the 13 to get to phase one. 13 million is what we need to get to the next one. But there's a grant or federal funding for 10 million. So the actual amount is 3 million that we have to account for, right? That's the amount we should be allocating our DCCs according to. And once we get that table, or once that's identified, and each project that's on the list is nailed down to this specific level, then we can create a DCC charge. Is that what I understand? Yeah. So we need some time to get all those things together.
Yeah.
I understand.
Any further comments on the motion on the table? Councillor Necker?
Yeah, just in regards to the upgrade that we're hoping for, like of utilizing the lagoon system, I think it was in the capital plan for 2022, or was it 2023? It's within the next 2 or 3 years. And it's in there right now as under a grant. It's not under our financials as debt or whatnot. Right. Just curious though, because I had asked this question about the roof, do we actually have up-to-date costing on that, or is that going to be done through this plan as well? Because if that quote was done from 4 or 5 years ago, it ain't going to be 30, shouldn't say ain't, not the right language, but it's not going to be 13 million.
$16.
It's going to be closer to 20 million probably.
Through your worship, we did update those costs with the grant program that we submitted in March. March. And
Okay.
so those numbers should be 2019, 2020 dollars.
Okay, of the budgeted one then?
For the grant itself, yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right. And Councilor Schiller.
Yeah, I was going to say I was not reading thoroughly, but reading through that final invest offer from McElhaney, and I'm excited to see this come together. It's really well laid out. I like how they've planned out for the COVID implications for engagement. I think our community's getting on board with all this, and we're figuring out the kinks for it. I agree with Councillor Ryan and Councillor Younker's concerns around the DCCs and the cart and the horse situation that we find ourselves in, that yes, we should be comprehensive and we should have these reports done, but we also really need to update those DCCs, and trying to find the balance between those two needs where we can get enough of the comprehensive reports to have a fulsome request, but that we're not waiting for it to be 100% before we get rolling on this, because
Could be another 80 years.
Through your worship, I concur. With the staffing level that we have in my department with COVID, we accomplished a huge amount of capital projects this year, which took all of our time. Thank you. And so now I have the chance to have a breath, put together proposals, and get these planning documents out of the way. And so it's going to be a fun year for us to do these long-term planning exercises.
yeah, that's awesome.
All right, any further comments on the motion on the table? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you, Mr. Black. Now we're going into engineering. So before we go into that, I'm just going to ask one question. Ms. Floyd, do you want to get this done? Do you want to take a 5-minute break? Are you guys okay to just take a break and use 5 over? You okay with that? You want to do this?
Yeah, can we take one? Oh, do you need one?
No, it's okay. As long as we don't get me standing here.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, let's carry on. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Floyd.
Do you want me to put it on?
Yes, please.
That the 2020 pavement management plan by Tetra Tech be received for information.
Thank you. Seconded by Councilor Barcel. Thank you. Mr. Black, I'll back out of the way.
Thank you so much for receiving this report today. In February, March of this year, I brought forward the 2015 version of this report and indicated at that time that we would be updating this report for this year, and so we have completed this task. This year, instead of using visual identification of all the cracks and ruts and bad things going on with our roads, the consultant now uses the computer, so we have a lot more data than we know what to do with, and it's all good stuff. Here's a little bit of the background that I just went over. So again, if you recall the report we did in the March, we talked about the pavement condition index, rutting, cracking, and what's the difference between last year? So,
Excuse me.
in this case, remember 0 represents basically a gravel road and 100 represents the roundabout. In 2015, the PCI was roughly a C, 72, and now we're running at half at 53. Again, in 2015, 23% of the roads had a PCI of 55 or less.
It's a passing grade.
And now we're at 55%. Cracking. Obviously, if the roads are in worse shape, the cracking is worse, the area of cracking is worse, the fatigue cracking is worse, and our local roads are in worse shape than the arterials or collectors. And that is due to the algorithms that the consultant used to develop our pavement programming. So we prioritized the arterials and collectors in the original report, and so we spent more money on those roads. Now, in this case, we've rebalanced the the algorithm so that now the local roads represent the same level of effort that the arterials or collectors do, so that now we can focus on us, the residents.
Good. That's awesome.
The COS next. Routing, yeah, so you can see 9% arterial roads and 27 in poor to very poor. Now you can see the arterial is 17%. That's like, it is an example would be 3rd Street, Airport. And you notice that under collectors that has actually decreased. That's because Victoria, the roundabout, has managed to help out that aspect quite a bit. Historic spending, $560,000 a year roughly for the last 10 years, and $235 on maintenance. Last spring, as council approved a budget of $1.25 for maintenance, $430 for rehabilitation, and $270,000 for curb gutters and sidewalks. So, consultant utilized 4 scenarios to evaluate. Not spending any money on fixing, $1 million, 1.25, and 1.5. And the current level of funding is represented by 1.25 million, and on the following graphs, it's the dashed line. So PCI, the dashed line gets better, $1 million expenditure gets worse. 1.5 million gets us roads a lot faster into good shape, and this is a 20-year graph. So you can see that it takes time to recover from not putting oil in your car and the motor burns up. Same with the cracking index. You can see in this case the line decreasing is better, and so again, in this case, 1.25 slowly gets us better for cracking. And the backlog, this is the one that is the big one. In 2015, and remember, a backlog means that if we had to write a check right now to fix all of those roads, 10.7 in 2015. That number is now almost $15 million. So what's the outcome? If we continue to spend 1.25 per year over the next 20 years, our backlog will decrease to roughly $7 million. $1 million a year, and we're going to keep the roads roughly the same condition they are as they are today. If we don't do anything, the backlog gets to be about $50 million in 20 years. And to asset management perspective, we need to spend, according to this report, continuing to spend 1.25 for maintenance, $450,000 for patching and paving, and another $300,000 for curb gutters and sidewalks is needed in order to maintain and improve the roads slightly over the next 20 years. We can't afford to do much more than that, but as long as we are making positive benefit to the asset, that's where we need to be. I think that 1.25 represents that tipping point. It's a great place to be, and it's something I think we can achieve financially. There's a lot of verbs there, sorry.
Okay, Councilor Rodney, Councilor.
Sweet. Do we know if we usually hire local contractors?
The asphalt supplier is local. Our landscapers are local.
Or do they go out to tender these jobs?
The asphalt, there's only one plant local.
Okay.
And so anybody that wanted to bid on it would be in a huge disadvantage.
Got it. Yeah.
So yeah, so the black itself, we get it locally.
Okay.
Many of the contractors, as you're aware, are also local.
Perfect. And then school safety, does that fit into curbs and sidewalks?
Yes, and I will be bringing forth, as you might recall, we also undertook a school safety audit this year. That is complete, and I have interim a capital budget discussion that we will be having in our future.
Excellent.
Which will be separate from
this money. Unfortunate. Okay. And then lastly, do you know if we can include any roads as DCC projects if we can prove that certain roads will have increased traffic due to development?
Absolutely. And a perfect example of that would be as soon as the intersection around Southside Market becomes untenable because nobody can get across 4th Street, and a signal perhaps is a solution, or a mini roundabout or something like that. If we can then say that, oh, all these new beds are happening at the south of town, and as they're coming in to shop or come downtown, if the locals were here, it would be just fine. But because that's the perfect example of a DCC project.
And so this does not include DCCs. This is just, we're going to keep the population the same, the roads.
This is just to maintain what we got.
Got it, thank you.
The next step, if I might add, Mayor, is I have a proposal ready to go once senior staff have reviewed it for the transportation master plan. That will tell us, do we need a second crossing of the Isilawit River? Do we need a new bridge over the Isilawit River? Do we need a roundabout to McKinnon Airport? And so once the public has had their chance to vet that, then we will be able to develop cost with public consultation for your adoption, which will then feed the TCCs.
Well, that happens at some point while we're still here.
Thanks. I have a question. Can I just clarify what Mr. Black just said, though? In regards to the master transportation plan, what's the rough expectation on when we might see that at the table to then go and tender it?
The RFP, the request for proposal, is ready to go in the next few weeks. So we'll send it out over the Christmas holidays.
That's terrific news.
Give consultants something to do. And when we come back for the new year, we should be able to evaluate those.
Okay, that's really exciting to hear.
Sometime in January.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Okay, can I ask my question?
Yes.
I'm really happy to see this come back, and also to hear the school safety things coming forward. That's a huge thing, as you probably know, for the community. I just had numbers questions. I was struggling to find anywhere really about our previous year maintenance numbers, and I couldn't recall how. I remember in 2020, in the last budget when we passed the resolution about the 2% property tax increase. I think it was the next 4 or 5 years. But in the report, it talks about previous maintenance levels on average over the last 10 years were like 560,000. How did we get to, so my first question is, how did we get, I can't recall, how did we get to this year bringing it all the way up to 1.25? What did
so we added all that, so 560 plus whatever for sidewalks, etc. Is that correct?
Through your worship, the sidewalks is a separate budget in addition to patching, and then the maintenance program was identified through the budgeting process. And I'm not 100% clear on the January, February history from last year regarding how the budget was developed. I know that it was, I believe, around $1 million, and based upon that amount, we came forward with the presentation to increase it to 1.25 based upon the old report.
Okay, so thanks. That's what I wanted to clarify. So I'm just making sure I understand the definition. So right now, if we were to leave the 2021 budget as is, I'm just hypothetically speaking, the road rehabilitation and reconstruction, which is the big number, would be 1.25 million. And, pardon?
Sorry, adjusted for inflation.
With the inflation, yeah, I was just going to get to that. And then the patching and cracking would be the 430,000, which, and so this report here has identified that dotted green line where it slightly gets better is the 1.25 plus the inflation. But if we really want to make it dead, we find out 1.5 million. So, okay, just so that clarifies. I just want to make sure we're on the same page because I was kind of confused a little bit. In regards to the inflation, so last year we talked briefly about how CPI doesn't represent the true cost of construction inflation. The CPI this year is trending at like 0.6% now. So I'm curious with the inflation that Edmonton, the city of Edmonton determined, what on average, what is theirs going up? Like this number, like the last few years, has it been 4, is it 10? I'm just curious.
Do you want me to answer that, Steve?
Sure.
I say, through your worship, it's actually been on average double the CPI.
Okay.
So whatever the CPI was for that particular year, what they call the MPI, Municipal Price Index, has been approximately double.
Okay.
The ENR usually falls within that range.
So, okay, and I appreciate understanding. So then, theoretically, then, just trying to make sure I understand. So for 1.25 budgeted for 2021, right now, the inflation that we would be adding there would be, let's just call it 2%, and then we would be adding the 2% of 1.25 onto it. Am I correct in assuming that? Yeah. So the 2% that we then passed, sorry, hear me out here. The 2% we then passed in the spring, it was 2%, which represents approximately $250,000. $240,000?
That's kind of what we were talking about in the spring. Yeah.
Right. So if we add that this year, and next year, and the year after, and the year after, in 4 years, we would be at $2.25 million.
Do you worship? So 2% would be...
It was 2% property tax increase was the resolution we passed.
So, but a 2% adjustment to the 1.25 would be 20?
But the resolution that we had passed was an actual 2% property tax increase, so we would be adding $250,000 a year to that budget. So I'm just curious now, this report is recommending that we go 1.5. So maybe for Ms. McCabe then, is that 8% would be significantly higher than what's being recommended. So is that kind of redundant now, Ms. Lowe or Ms. McCabe, or?
Ms. McCabe's got her hand up, so we're going to ask her that.
Your worship, right now, a predominant amount of this 1.25 million is actually funded through gas tax funds,
Okay.
original expenditure. So by doing the 2% of property taxes as an increase to the transportation infrastructure reserve, it allows us to wean ourselves off of that funding from gas tax and use it for other projects.
Okay, so that's what I was looking for. Okay, because in the reserve, the TIC transportation, it showed about $1 million. So I was wondering, okay, so that's the big piece I was missing, is that currently a lot of this is funded by the gas tax, but we were hoping to move that to come out of the TIC reserve and then use the gas tax for something else. Is that right?
Yes, the gas tax is definitely an oversubscribed source of funding for different projects.
Right, okay. So,
I'm just going to stop you. Do we know how long the gas tax will continue? That's kind of what we were talking about, because we don't know if that's going to carry on in perpetuity. So it was like, if we can do this transfer over, then we know that we've got funding as we move forward.
Yeah.
It is to reduce our reliance on it. So your worship, you're correct. We don't know. That's a program that's at the behest of the upper levels of government.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid point. I mean, it's been around a good amount of time, and I think the only thing is what federal government is reducing taxes. I mean, the gas tax is going up, right? It goes up and goes up. But I think it's a fair point. But anyways, I was just going to say that I'm in total support of maintaining it at 1.5, going to the 1.5. But I think, again, with the COVID, I think this 1 year, we continue it from the gas tax, don't reallocate, in my opinion. And if we can find other alternatives to take from another reserve, or maybe for next year to pull a little bit from the surplus to increase, but I think this year we keep it at the 1.25 as it, but don't transfer the money this year, that's all, because that would add a 2% property tax increase. But I'm in full support, and I appreciate getting this done and maintaining it, absolutely.
And those are the things that we can discuss when we get into the budget talk.
Yeah, well, I was just curious, because does this second recommendation, is that going to commit us to that transfer, Ms. Lowe? Or, because it just talks about more so maintaining it at 1.25 annually, but it doesn't really talk about how.
Ms. McGarry?
To your worship? Yes.
Yes.
This is being committed already, this is a recommitment, and then the 2% of taxation would be needed to fund the 1.5 million and increasing it.
Oh, I'm not saying the 1.5.
Oh, sorry, 1.25.
Okay, so if we put this through, we're committed to this, and then if we want to find savings for our community as far as property tax increase goes, we need to look other places.
I will let you know.
Okay, all right. Okay, so just before we move forward, I can see your wheels are going there, but I'm waiting for a response before I carry on to the other councilors.
Yeah, no, I think, you lost me a little there. I think that we budgeted 1.25 this year, and it came from a combination of the gas tax and the TIC, is my understanding. And the recommendation from the report is to maintain it at 1.25 plus inflation. I believe that we should actually go more than that and get to that 1.5. I just don't think we should do that in 2021. And my understanding is obviously, and I may be incorrect, Ms. Lowe, but because we passed that resolution last year, it would come forward in the property tax for that 2% again, because that was something we passed last year. All I'm saying is I don't think we should do that part and transfer the money around. I think we should cancel that 2% for this year, keep it at the 1.25, which it's at, and then next year we tackle it. Because we know 1.25 isn't going to set us further behind in 1 year.
No, you're right. Okay. All right, Councilor Elliott, and then Councilor Charlotte.
The premise of this transportation budget is that we're going to carry on with the same traffic patterns and the same use of the roads as we are today or over the last number of years. Is that correct? Does that make sense?
I would not expect statistically a huge change in the road usage in the next 5 years.
Do you think council can actually put in place policies to make that happen, to reduce the traffic on our roads?
To change the modes?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So is that more forward thinking than saying paying for the existing, which is going up astronomically each year?
So, Your Worship, the Transportation Master Plan will look at the road network, it will look at the trail network, it will look at the pedestrian network and active transportation, in addition to parking in the downtown core and the transit system. So with that document in place as a guiding document for the future of the community, that is how we encourage that shift from single occupant vehicle to a bus. Bicycles with studded tires versus slicks in the summer. So, however, we still have 100 kilometers of road that we have to maintain. Building that other additional infrastructure, separated bike lanes, make people get out of their cars more, fully behind that 100%, but we need that plan in order to achieve that goal. Regardless of the mode shift in the future, we still have to fix and keep our roads in the condition that represents a resort.
Yeah. And that's maybe what I'm getting to, is that maybe we get it so we're not deteriorating more than we are, but let's not spend a fortune on it until we got a more complete plan where we want to be. Because I think there's some solutions, one-way streets, one-way, we can solve. I want less pavement in our town. I want less traffic and less wear, less plowing. So those are things that need to be addressed. And if we're going to plan for the future, let's start doing that now rather than just budgeting 5 years out for a multi-million-dollar outlay on pavement.
And we're going to go to Mr. Black, and Councilor Charlotte, and Councilor Ryan.
Through your worship, this transportation master plan will achieve the goals that you are looking for. The timing, we have 1 year to get this next round of paving out of the way, and then we will be able to adopt a transportation master plan and update the DTCs, and we will be able to look at all of these aspects of our community from a transportation perspective.
So, I mean, from my perspective, I'm all for maintaining what we have and going with the proposals he's got here. But I think beyond the next year, I'd be resistant.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I fully support both these. I agree. I think we should be working towards really trying to fix these roads in a smart, strategic way, so that we are getting our community better. But my father is rolling around town in his little electric scooter, and I'm trying to keep him on the sidewalks, and it is terrifying. The amount of cracks, and it's easy to overlook that when you are able-bodied. But when you have mobility issues, those sidewalks are critical. Living down in Farwell and seeing that new road and those new sidewalks, and I hope that's the standard we're going to be seeing throughout our community as we fix these and rebuild the backlog. It makes it so much more pleasant to move around and easier to move around and safe to move around, especially for those of our community that need to use wheels. So, fully supported.
Good. Councilor Ryan.
I was just going to say that I think I really appreciate Councilor Elliott's point. But I think in the worst case scenario, if we devote this money and then we see reduced wear, we can always either divert the money, or at that point there might be different needs, like maybe we need electrical car plug-in stations or whatever. So then we're using that money in a better way, but we still have it there because we budgeted for those changing uses.
Good. Program. Councilor.
Yeah, so Your Worship, just to clarify then, this here we're committing to the 1.25 million, which is what we currently funded it at in the year 2020, plus the Edmonton inflation. And then how we actually fund that, though, we'll discuss in the new year as part of the budget process?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
So we're going to do you want me to do this in one motion or between this vote? Two? Yep. So any further question on receiving a report? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on to number 2. Will someone put that on the table for me? Councilor Burks-Hill or Councilor Burks-Hill, go ahead. You're ready to go.
That the road rehabilitation and road maintenance capital budgets be maintained at $1.25 million annually in accordance with this update to the pavement management plan, and be increased annually to account for inflation using the City of Edmonton Municipal Cost Index or Engineering News Record Index.
Great. Thank you. Seconder for that, Councilor Elliott. You had a question? Councilor Juncker, go ahead. You had your hand up to second it?
Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Any further questions? So, Councilor Burks-Hill, you have a question?
Well, just because it says using either one of those two things, those are two separate indexes. Should we just stick to one?
Do you want to weigh in on that, Mr. Blunt?
I would choose the one that's the biggest.
Well, should we specify whichever is higher or whichever is lower, or?
I believe that is a choice that we can make when we bring forward the budget discussions, and we can ask Director McKay to provide that information to you, so we can do that comparison at that time.
Perfect.
Are there usually large gaps? Like there are
I don't know if there's large gaps between the two.
Typically,
I would hope not, yeah.
they're both based on construction indexes, so
I've never heard of the units before.
it's the U.S.-based construction.
Trying to get it in U.S. dollars?
Well, don't even go there. Okay, any further questions on this motion?
So we're not, sorry,
Yep, go ahead.
we're not committing to a 5-year plan or 10-year plan. We're just saying that we're going to bump it up 1.25 million plus inflation for the next.
We're already out.
Perpetuity.
We're already at that.
Yeah. So
Until we change.
why I thought we were just going to eliminate it. For me, I would like to vote for 1 year, and then we just come back when the transportation plan's in place.
That's what we're doing.
That's what we're doing anyway.
We're voting on a motion to do it annually, are we not?
Yeah, but it's still going to come back next year to look at it and see where we're at. Is that not correct?
No,
Oh, once it's in the budget, it's in the budget.
Okay. I'm looking at Ms. McKay because she's nodding yes. So what are you telling me?
Through your worship, we do a long-term financial plan, but we do reevaluate it on an annual basis.
Okay.
But we wouldn't have like a motion like this come forward. It would be like, oh yeah, you guys put 1.2 in last year, so we just slid that in, right? That's what
We
you
would
would
start with that as a starting point, if it was required. Obviously, we would be reviewing the projects with Mr. Black and
Okay.
determining.
but the 1.25, to clarify though, is status quo. That's already budgeted for
Yeah.
2020, it's budgeted for in 2021. The only change would be the inflation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
I'm good now too.
You good? Everybody's good? You're not
Well,
good?
I'm just curious why we would need to commit to 1.2 for the next number of years if we're just going to have a complete revision next year, or a complete review of it next year.
Okay. So when it's worded annually, we're going to put this in motion but it's still going to come back to the table in a year's time because we're already talking about what we need to be doing, and as the transportation plan comes forward, there may be other ways to get people around. Am I hearing this wrong, or Mr. Block?
I would,
Yeah, I think it's more
And Ms. McKay, you want to weigh in?
however, typically, council always has the choice to change this aspect. We present this on a 5-year cycle because that's typically how pavement maintenance is performed, right? And so you do have the opportunity as council to say, no, you're crazy.
Well, that's my worry, is that it just gets slipped into our operating process here, and we're not going to review it each year, because it's a 5-year item.
Councilor Younger.
I think it's important to clarify that it says maintained annually, but all of our budgets are maintained annually, and then we address them yearly. But under the legislation, we have to maintain something annually because we have to input some sort of figure in. So if we didn't use this language to say maintain 1.25 annually, then we're going to go down the rabbit hole of saying 1.25 2020 was 2021. We would have to commit to all those numbers because we have to have something plugged into the 5-year plan.
So that's what I think we're establishing a 5-year plan.
Right, but we still legally have to have numbers put in, which is why we're just, from what I'm saying is I'm content with 1.25 annually in the report, the 5-year plan, because I know we're going to address it every single year.
Unless we're collecting for reserves for next year, which we're very much doing. And we're collecting and putting it into the reserve fund, payment reserve. Was that right, Jen?
That's currently in the budget, in the financial plan, yes, but this is talking about the actual budget line item in the capital plan, which is...
But the 1.2 we have to spend for the next 5 years, you're collecting in reserves.
We're not, through your worship, we're actually allocating and spending that every year.
Okay.
Because we, according to the plan, we have to, in order to show that improvement.
Okay, so we're all good? Okay, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you so much, Mr. Black.
I can put the following on if you want.
Yes, please.
That the following grant and aid applications be approved.
Second for that motion, please, Councilor Brooks-Hill. Any discussion on any of these? Do you have any questions about that?
Just a random question, just for knowledge. The grant and aid budget, it says at the end we'll have an unspent balance of $1,431. Does that just get in the yearly budget's always the same? Would that get rolled into next year's then? So next year we could have 26.4, or does that go to the general capital reserve?
So Ms. McCabe, explain how that works.
Through your worship, it would just be unspent funds, so it's just part of the...
That we didn't spend.
Exactly, just money we didn't spend. It's
Perfect.
no different than any operating budget line item.
Perfect, thanks.
All right. Any further questions on any of these? Okay, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. 12A correspondence. Councilor Brooks-Hill, Councilor Charlotte, you still in agreement to sit on the Regional Library Board? Okay. Somebody want to put this on the table, please? Councilor Elliott?
That Councillor Michael Bruce Hill be appointed as director and Councillor Nicole Charlotte be appointed as alternate director to the board of the Okanagan Regional Library.
Seconder for that motion. Councilor Junker, I'm going to get someone who's not one of you two, okay? So Councilor Junker, any discussion on the motion? You're both willing to do that. Thank you for that. All in favor? Motion's carried. We're now going to go to number 14, questions from the press. So we're just going to wait a couple minutes to see if we have any questions from the press. We'll call in on this phone line. I'm sorry?
Do we give them an email address as well, or just?
I think Cindy just gave him the phone number. Yeah. That we would do this time again in this format. So.
I think that email's a great idea.
I do too, because they can just check, and if they had a question throughout the
That's
meeting.
and easier for them too, because they don't know when the meeting's gonna end.
Or they watching.
Well, but they might be like the interesting conversation might happen at the beginning of the meeting. They might be
President, you said at the end.
So we're going to give them other options. So Cindy and I have kind of talked about that sort of thing. So we'll figure out a way that they may have questions after they read through the agenda, and may want to post those to us, and then we can go forward with that ahead of time. Yeah. Yeah.
We're going to wait for them to say that they have no questions.
There's a good idea.
Well, yeah,
We just expect contact from them. Yeah, like text us a message, text us if you're going to call, text if you're not, whatever. Something.
yeah, text that you're going to call.
Yeah, exactly.
So then we don't hear from you, we're not going to.
So we're going to wait.
We just give, what, we give 2 minutes?
Yeah, we just have, just give me another few seconds here. Okay, seeing no questions from the press, I'm going to ask to go in camera pursuant to section 90.1K of the Community Charter. Councillor Sherlett, seconded by Councillor Elliott. All in favor, motion's carried. We're going to go and take a break for a couple minutes, and then we'll come back in camera.